Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we slip into the dim corridors of history, where the echo of footsteps on polished stone and the shimmer of candlelight illuminate not merely rooms, but entire centuries. Imagine you're wrapped in blankets, the night outside pressed against your window like velvet, and here you are, leaning into a tale as old as civilization itself. Monarchies, their crowns, their gilded thrones, their trembling courtiers, have endured when entire empires fell to dust. The marble halls may crumble, but somehow the crown survives. And as you peer at this gallery of rulers stretching from the Far East to the narrow streets of Europe, you'll begin to realize that humanity has never quite shaken its obsession with crowns, scepters, and the peculiar theatre of inherited power. You probably won't survive as long as these dynasties, though, unless you've got a really good skincare routine and a suspiciously effective vitamin regimen. That's the thing about monarchies. They linger while people slip into the ground. One emperor dies, another is crowned, and the machine keeps humming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in bed, drop a comment with your location and the exact time. You'd be surprised how many people are half a world away but wide awake with you in this same little community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of monarchy itself, not one specific palace or gilded hall, but the very idea of crowns across cultures, like walking into a dream where the world's rulers sit side by side. Some wear robes sewn from gold threads, others simple white cotton or fur-lined cloaks. A few lean on ceremonial swords, others grasp scepters carved from ivory. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the way old books smell when their pages curl, the way carved stone holds chill even in summer. Monarchies, unlike empires or republics, thrive on the illusion of permanence. The emperor is not just a man. He is a bridge between gods and mortals, between yesterday and tomorrow. The king is not just a ruler. He is the state itself, his bloodline the very constitution. You realize how strange that is. Today you vote for leaders, shuffle them in and out like roommates you don't entirely like. But once upon a time you were supposed to believe the guy with the shiny hat was born to rule, because heaven said so. You imagine yourself centuries ago, in a thatched hut, a fire flickering weakly against the cold. Someone knocks on your wooden door and announces that a baby has been born in the castle. That baby is your future king. You don't know his face, you don't know his temperament, but you know one thing: your life belongs to him. If he thrives, your fields may be safe. If he falters, war may fall on you like a wolf pack in the dark. And here's the eerie part. Most people didn't resist that logic. It was simply air, unquestioned. Historians still argue whether this acceptance was devotion, indoctrination, or just survival instinct. Now, monarchies weren't all glitter and gold. Behind every jewel-encrusted crown there were assassinations, exiles, and the occasional bizarre superstition. Remember Cleopatra's supposed eyeliner made with ground lead? Not exactly FDA approved. Or the fact that some medieval royals believed bathing weakened you, an excellent way to cultivate a stinky throne room. But the illusion of unbroken lineage, that fragile line connecting father to son, mother to daughter, kept the institution alive. And it's that illusion that has carried 10 monarchies, the ones we'll explore tonight, across wars, revolutions, and Netflix-level scandals. Your feet drag across invisible centuries as you begin to sense a pattern. The oldest monarchies often sprang not from strength, but from adaptability. Japan's emperors wrapped themselves in myths of descent from the sun goddess, which made them untouchable even when shoguns ruled in their name. Britain's monarchy learned to shed real political power, but kept the drama and pageantry that television loves. Denmark made itself less threatening by becoming quaint, wrapping its crown in fairy tales and constitutional limits. The trick wasn't being mighty, it was surviving by changing costumes whenever the world demanded it. Close your eyes and picture a map unfurling like a giant parchment. Across Asia, Europe, and even the far-flung islands of the Pacific, little dots glow where monarchies still reign. Each dot is a survival story. Some are neon bright, like Britain, constantly in the news for weddings, funerals, and family drama. Others glow faintly, like Bhutan, a tiny Himalayan kingdom where kings traded some of their power for democracy, but kept the reverence of their people. Some blink on and off, like Cambodia, where the throne was abolished, restored, abolished again, then resurrected, a phoenix with gold feathers singed. And then there are places you might not expect. Morocco, where the king claims descent from the prophet and wraps authority in religious legitimacy, or Lesotho, a mountain-ringed African kingdom tucked inside South Africa, clinging to its monarchy like a badge of survival. The truth is, monarchies endure not because people always love them, but because people often love what they represent. Continuity, tradition, the fantasy that in a world of chaos there's something steady, even if it's just a tiara-wearing figure smiling on banknotes. A quirky tidbit. In Sweden, one king literally turned into a pop culture icon by starring in a calendar wearing silly costumes. Proof that even monarchies can meme themselves into relevance. Of course, there's always tension. Monarchies balance between irrelevance and interference. Too powerful, and the people may revolt. Too powerless, and the people may forget why the crown matters at all. Historians still argue whether the British monarchy today has any real role beyond entertainment. But then you recall that a single royal wedding can attract hundreds of millions of viewers. Clearly, something about crowns still captures the human imagination. Now imagine yourself wandering down a grand corridor lined with portraits. Each painting represents one of the oldest monarchies still alive. The eyes follow you, regal and unblinking. You pause at the first frame, Japan's chrysanthemum throne, the shimmering line that claims to stretch back to 660 BCE. Beside it, Denmark's monarchs woven into Viking sagas. Next to them, Britain's royal family, more photographed than any dynasty in history. Each portrait is an invitation to step deeper, to linger with emperors and queens, to let their stories cradle you like an ancient lullaby. You notice, though, that the portraits aren't entirely flattering. Some monarchs look tired, some suspiciously arrogant, some more than a little unwashed. You smirk, because monarchy, like humanity, is messy. The fairy tale gloss is always chipped at the edges. One king may expand his kingdom with brilliance, his son may squander it all in drunken hunts. A queen may embody elegance, her successor may bankrupt the treasury buying peacock feathers. And yet the crown keeps moving. Like a baton in a marathon that never ends. Take a breath. The air is thick with dust and incense, the kind of smell that reminds you of both old libraries and ancient temples. You walk further and sense the paradox. Monarchies are at once fragile and immortal. One revolution can topple them. One myth can preserve them for 1,000 years. And tonight your task is not to judge but to witness. To glide through these palaces and huts, coronations and coups, and see why 10 monarchies, among hundreds that have vanished, still shine. As your eyes adjust to the dim glow, you notice the floor itself is uneven, patched with tiles from different cultures and centuries. That's the story of monarchy, no clean line, but a patchwork quilt. The oldest monarchies stitch themselves from myth, law, accident and survival instinct. And as you step forward, your bare feet whisper across stone that remembers every coronation oath, every whispered prayer for heirs. Every night a monarch stared out of a palace window wondering if their dynasty would last until morning. It's almost funny, in a dark way, how monarchies depend so much on the fragility of one thing, children. A dynasty can rise or collapse depending on whether a baby survives smallpox or whether a prince produces an heir. Think of Britain's Tudor line. Glorious Henry VIII ends up with just one frail son and 2 daughters to juggle a kingdom's fate. Think of Japan, where debates still rage over whether women should be allowed to inherit the throne to keep the line alive. Historians still argue whether these succession crises strengthen monarchies by forcing adaptation, or weaken them by exposing their absurd dependence on biology. You yawn softly. It's that pleasant yawn that stretches the lungs like a cat arching its back. You're sinking into the cadence of this journey. Monarchies are like lullabies sung in stone halls. The words change, but the melody stays the same. Kings die, crowns pass, myths endure. And somewhere in that rhythm is the comfort of knowing that history repeats. Not neatly, not kindly, but consistently. One last image before we close this opening passage. Picture a crown resting on a velvet pillow. It is old, so old that some of its jewels are chipped, its gold dulled, its embroidery frayed. But still, when light hits it, it gleams. That gleam has hypnotized humanity for millennia. convincing us that maybe, just maybe, some people are born not only to live but to symbolize something greater. Tonight, you'll trace those gleams across the world, and in their shimmer, perhaps you'll find a little sleep. You glide deeper into the gallery of monarchies, and the first portrait that truly glows is Japan's, bathed in warm golden light, petals of the chrysanthemum curling outward like sunbeams. The Japanese imperial family is not only the oldest continuous monarchy in the world, but also one of the most myth-soaked. You pause before the image, and for a moment the paint shimmers, and you find yourself walking through the misty archways of an ancient Shinto shrine. The air smells faintly of cedarwood and incense. You hear bells chiming, delicate as wind through glass. Japan's monarchy, the chrysanthemum throne, claims an unbroken line stretching back to Emperor Jimmu, who supposedly founded the dynasty in 660 BCE. That's older than Rome, older than most of what we call Western civilization, and whether or not you believe the literal date, the story matters, because it has given Japan's emperors the aura of timelessness. Imagine saying your family business has lasted for over 2,000 years. Meanwhile, you can't even keep a houseplant alive for 3 weeks. The emperors claim descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess. It's not just a convenient myth. It's the whole foundation of the throne. The emperor is not merely a ruler, but a sacred bridge, a living link between gods and humans. For centuries this meant that the emperor was less a political schemer and more a sacred figurehead. Others wielded the actual power, shoguns, generals, warlords, but the emperor's existence anchored legitimacy. Historians still argue whether this was clever manipulation or genuine devotion. Either way, the throne survived precisely because it became untouchable. Too divine to depose, too abstract to be blamed for taxes or wars. Step with me into Heian-era Kyoto, around the year 800. The city is elegant, wooden palaces painted with cinnabar, aristocrats gliding through gardens in robes that ripple like waterfalls of silk. The emperor sits behind screens of painted bamboo, rarely seen, more a concept than a man. His courtiers write poems about moonlight and cherry blossoms, and the government slowly calcifies into ritual. Power slides into the hands of families like the Fujiwara, who marry daughters into the imperial line and act as regents. And yet, the throne itself remains unbroken. The chrysanthemum blooms season after season. Quirky tidbit for you. Some emperors were enthroned as literal toddlers. Imagine being a 2-year-old whose main achievements so far are drooling and knocking over cups, and suddenly the entire nation bows to you. You'd be crowned with a cap bigger than your head, while regents run the country until you're old enough to understand that crayons are not food. And still, the fiction of divine continuity held. People didn't laugh at the idea of a baby emperor. They saw it as proof of heavenly order. As centuries pass, the pattern deepens. By the 12th century, the shoguns rise. Samurai rule the land, enforcing order with steel. The emperor, tucked away in Kyoto, becomes almost invisible. To Western eyes, it looks like the throne has lost all meaning, just a puppet in robes. But think carefully. The fact that warlords never abolished the throne is itself revealing. They needed the emperor to rubber-stamp legitimacy, to sanctify their rule. The samurai could swing swords, but they could not conjure divine ancestry. Only the emperor could do that. Let's fast forward to the 19th century. The Tokugawa shogunate collapses after centuries of rule. Western powers arrive with cannons and treaties, and suddenly Japan has to decide what to do. And what do they reach for? The emperor. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration places Emperor Meiji at the centre of a newly modernising Japan. For the first time in centuries, the emperor is not just symbolic. He's declared the supreme ruler. Modern armies march in his name. Railroads, factories, and a new constitution all unfold under the chrysanthemum crest. The monarchy, far from vanishing, has reinvented itself as the soul of a modern nation. You stand now in Tokyo, under the massive stone gates of the imperial palace. It's quiet, even today. The wide gravel paths crunch under your feet. The moat reflects the sky like a liquid mirror, and guards stand in crisp uniforms. The palace itself is hidden behind layers of walls and gardens, like the idea of monarchy itself, always there, always just out of reach. The emperor, even in the 20th century, remained semi-divine. Schoolchildren bowed toward the palace each morning. His face was never casually displayed. You could see pictures of generals, actors, even Western movie stars, but the emperor was sacred, untouchable. Then comes the cataclysm. World War II. Japan's imperial ambitions end in destruction. The nation lies in ruins, Hiroshima and Nagasaki scarred by fire. The emperor's role teeters on the brink. For the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito speaks directly to his people in a trembling radio broadcast announcing surrender. Imagine hearing the voice of a god through static admitting defeat. The spell breaks. And yet, here's the twist. The throne survives. The American occupiers, led by General MacArthur, make a calculated choice. Abolishing the monarchy might fracture Japan irreparably. So Hirohito renounces his divinity, becomes human, and the chrysanthemum throne transforms again. From divine ruler to constitutional monarch, a symbol of unity in a democratic Japan, you breathe in, noticing how resilient this institution is. The throne survived warlords, modernization, firebombs, and nuclear surrender. Today, Emperor Naruhito, enthroned in 2019, represents the same line that began with Jimmu. He's not a political leader. Japan's democracy handles that. But his presence still carries deep symbolism. During disasters, earthquakes, or the 2011 tsunami, the emperor and empress visited victims, bowed, and listened. Those images soothed the nation more than any parliamentary debate. Here's a quirky, almost cinematic tidbit. During enthronement ceremonies, emperors sit on a massive throne hidden behind curtains. When the curtain is drawn aside, the emperor appears, radiating authority. It's a stage trick, really, but powerful. Humans love the drama of revelation. One moment the throne is empty, the next, a godlike figure emerges, and your brain tingles with awe, even if you know rationally that it's just a person with good posture. Historians still argue whether the Japanese monarchy truly is unbroken. Some point to murky succession disputes, others to moments when emperors were sidelined for generations. But continuity in monarchy is as much perception as fact. The people believed the line endured, so it endured. That's the secret sauce. If you believe the sun goddess smiles on your dynasty, you don't question a few inconvenient centuries of puppet rule. Now picture the chrysanthemum crest itself, 16 golden petals radiating outward. You see it carved on shrines, stamped on passports, pressed into coins. It's the family seal of the oldest dynasty still alive, and it glimmers like a cosmic sunflower. You walk past rows of ordinary chrysanthemums in a garden, their petals soft and earthy smelling, and suddenly one seems to gleam brighter. That's how monarchy works. Take something ordinary, like a flower, and make it divine through story. Think about this. While dynasties across the world rose and collapsed, the Caesars of Rome, the pharaohs of Egypt, the Mughal emperors of India, the Japanese imperial line persisted. Not always powerful, not always respected, but always present. That persistence makes you feel both wonder and unease. How much of history is survival of the adaptable, rather than the strongest? You hear a whisper of gagaku music, ancient court tunes played on flutes and zithers, slow, otherworldly, like the soundtrack of eternity. The melody wraps you in silk, makes your eyelids heavy. The emperors may be flesh and blood, with quirks and flaws, but their throne is set to this music, a rhythm so slow it feels eternal. And you smile, because tucked inside this solemnity are human moments. Emperors who loved poetry. Emperors who complained about back pain from sitting in lotus position too long. Emperors who, in private, were probably just as baffled by the world as you are when your phone freezes. The divine is always balanced by the mundane. That's why the chrysanthemum throne still feels alive. Not because of myths alone, but because people project onto it their own hopes, sorrows, and need for continuity. The petals of the chrysanthemum fold inward now, as though closing for the night. You feel yourself stepping back from the palace gardens, past the bridges, through the shrine gates. The glow of Japan's monarchy lingers behind your eyes, a reminder that sometimes the most fragile things, the faith of a people in a story, can last the longest. And as you leave, the faint sound of bells follows you, like a lullaby sung by centuries themselves. You drift westward now, the golden chrysanthemum fading behind you, replaced by the glimmer of jewels, the rattle of carriage wheels, and the echo of bells that have rung for centuries over grey stone and green hills. Britain's monarchy rises before you, not the oldest by calendar years, but perhaps the most globally recognisable. a dynasty that has reinvented itself more times than a pop star on a farewell tour. You step into its story the way you might step into a foggy London morning, slowly, with a shiver, not sure if you're walking into a fairy tale or a scandal sheet. The British crown is less a single line than a tangled forest of family trees, pruned, hacked, and occasionally burned down before sprouting anew. Unlike Japan's seemingly unbroken thread, Britain's monarchy is a saga of reinvention. Saxon kings, Norman conquerors, Plantagenets, Tudors, Stuarts, Hanoverians, Windsors. It's like a relay race where the baton is sometimes dropped, kicked, or set on fire, and yet somehow still ends up at the finish line. And that's the miracle. Continuity through chaos. You hear church bells as you picture the coronation of William the Conqueror in 1066, a moment that stitched the monarchy into something recognisably British. Before him, England was a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon rulers, with crowns passed around like borrowed cloaks. William arrives from Normandy, defeats Harold at Hastings, and plants a new dynasty with a firm hand. The Bayeux Tapestry unfurls before your eyes, its embroidered knights galloping like cartoon figures, and there's Harold with an arrow in his eye, a reminder that monarchy often begins in blood. But from that conquest comes continuity. A single crown now represents a single kingdom. You wander through Westminster Abbey in your imagination, the musty air tinged with wax and incense. Every coronation since 1066 has been staged here. Think about that. Nearly 1,000 years of monarchs kneeling, anointing oil brushed onto their foreheads, and the heavy saint. Edward's crown lowered onto their heads. The same rituals, the same prayers, repeated again and again until they feel carved into the stones themselves. And yet each monarch faced a different world. Medieval knights, Tudor courtiers, Victorian industrialists, and 21st century TV crews. A quirky tidbit here, that anointing oil isn't just olive oil. Historically, it's been mixed with ambergris, musk, and other exotic ingredients. Ambergris, in case you're not familiar, is a waxy substance that comes from the digestive system of sperm whales. So yes, every British monarch since the Middle Ages has essentially been dabbed with glorified whale vomit. Glamorous, isn't it? Isn't. The medieval period rolls past you like a dim candlelit procession. Kings like Henry II and Edward I carved castles into the land, asserting royal power, while others, like King John, stumbled badly enough to be forced into signing the Magna Carta in 1215. That charter, with its wax seals and stiff Latin, is often celebrated as the birth of liberty, but for the king it was a humiliating leash. And yet, notice the continuity. Even when barons rebelled, they didn't abolish the crown. They redefined it. Britain's monarchy endured by bending just enough to avoid breaking. Then come the Tudors, and here the crown becomes theatre. Henry VIII struts into your mind in all his padded doublet glory, bursting with appetites and ambition. He marries, divorces, beheads, and marries again, not merely for love, but to secure heirs and the dynasty itself. His split from Rome in the 1530s creates the Church of England, welding monarchy to religion in a way that still echoes in British life today. You can almost hear the clash of organ music in a cathedral, the smell of burning incense replaced by the acrid smoke of monasteries being dissolved. The monarchy is no longer just hereditary. It's national, spiritual, political. And of course, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, stepping into the light. You see her ruffled collar, her pale face like porcelain, her hand resting on a globe. She crafts an image of majesty so carefully staged that it outlives her. Portraits show her towering, eternal, almost divine. Behind the veil of paint she's a canny politician, using pageantry as armour. A debate lingers among scholars even now. Did Elizabeth genuinely wield power? Or did she simply master the performance of it? Either way, the crown shines brighter in her reign than almost any before. But continuity doesn't mean smoothness. The 17th century brings civil war, beheadings, and a monarchy that actually vanishes for a while. Picture the scaffold in Whitehall, January 1649. King Charles I, solemn and stiff-necked, steps onto the platform. Snow falls softly, muffling the crowd. He lays his head on the block, the axe swings, and suddenly Britain has no king. For a few years under Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth, the country experiments with republic, and yet, here's the punchline, the monarchy comes back. Charles II is restored in 1660, parades through London to jubilant cheers, and the crown settles back on the throne as if the whole bloody interlude were just a bad dream. Historians still argue whether that brief republic was doomed by design or simply crushed by the cultural pull of monarchy. As you walk through St. James's Palace in your mind, you hear whispers of gossip, because British monarchy is also about scandal. Mistresses, illegitimate children, power struggles behind velvet curtains. George I, imported from Hanover in 1714, barely speaks English and spends much of his time with German advisors. His reign sparks a quirky tradition. British monarchs don't necessarily need to be British at all, as long as Parliament accepts them. The line of succession twists through cousins, nieces and distant relatives, always bending but never snapping. The 18th and 19th centuries bring empire. Queen Victoria, dressed in black after the death of her beloved Prince Albert, becomes the grandmother of Europe. You imagine the Great Exhibition of 1851, Crystal Palace glittering with inventions, steam engines hissing, colonial spoils displayed like trophies. The monarchy, now constitutional and limited, nonetheless projects enormous soft power. Victoria doesn't dictate policy, but she symbolises empire itself. Her face appears on stamps from India to Australia, the most reproduced image of the century. Continuity again. By reinventing itself as a symbol rather than a ruler, the crown thrives. Here's a quirky tidbit. Victoria was famously short, only about 5 feet tall. When she met with foreign dignitaries, her throne was sometimes placed on a platform to give her more presence, a literal elevation of majesty. And yet the illusion worked. Even small details became tools of continuity, convincing the public that the monarchy was more than mortal flesh. You step into the 20th century, and the monarchy faces new trials: world wars, abdications, television. Edward VIII, the king who abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, shakes the throne like an earthquake. The crown teeters on the edge of irrelevance, but then stabilises under George VI, the stammering king who becomes a symbol of resilience during the Blitz. Picture London in flames, bombs shrieking down, and the king and queen refusing to flee the city. Their presence steadies the people, the way a lighthouse steadies sailors in a storm. And then Elizabeth II, reigning for 70 years, becomes the face of continuity itself. You can hear her Christmas broadcasts, her clipped voice, calm and measured. She presides over the decline of empire, the rise of pop culture, the birth of the internet. By the time of her Platinum Jubilee, she is less a political figure and more a grandmotherly presence, a kind of national comfort blanket. Historians still argue whether her longevity saved the monarchy or simply delayed its reckoning. But for you, watching the Trooping the Colour Parade, scarlet uniforms shimmering in the sun, the monarchy feels eternal, stitched into the fabric of British life. A modern quirky tidbit. In the 1970s, Queen Elizabeth was sent a poisoned chocolate cake in the post. It was intercepted, of course, but it shows the odd ways monarchy attracts devotion and hostility in equal measure. The crown is a magnet, for loyalty, for criticism, for obsession. Now, in the 21st century, Britain's monarchy stands as both ancient relic and Netflix soap opera. Royal weddings are global spectacles. Funerals attract millions of mourners, and family dramas spill across headlines. You walk through Buckingham Palace in your mind, chandeliers sparkling, corgis scurrying across the carpets, and you sense both weight and absurdity. How can such an archaic institution still matter in a modern democracy? And yet it does. People queue for hours just to glimpse a coffin lying in state, or cheer as a carriage rattles past on wedding day. Historians still argue whether the monarchy is doomed to fade, but the truth is simpler. Continuity is its magic trick. By shedding power when necessary, by embracing pageantry, by existing as both soap opera and sacred symbol, Britain's crown endures. It is less about ruling and more about representing continuity in human form. As you step away, you hear Big Ben chiming midnight, deep and steady. Fog curls around you, and the glow of the British crown fades into the night. Continuity has carried it through conquest, civil war, empire, abdication and scandal. The jewels gleam not because they're flawless, but because the world cannot quite look away. And so the crown remains, perched precariously, yet somehow eternal. You feel the fog of London dissolving behind you, replaced by a crisp northern wind. It smells of salt from the sea and smoke from wood fires curling upward from timber halls. Ahead lies Denmark, the land of sagas, ships and kings who carried axes as often as they carried sceptres. Here the monarchy claims to be the oldest in Europe, its roots curling deep into Viking soil, its crown polished by both raiding and ruling. You tread onto the damp earth of Jutland, where meadows roll toward the sea, and the story of Denmark's monarchy rises like a longship cresting a wave. The Danish crown's official lineage traces back to King Gorm the Old, who ruled in the early 10th century. Imagine that. Around the same time when Japanese emperors already had centuries behind them, Denmark was coalescing under a Viking ruler with a name that sounds like a grumpy uncle at a family reunion. Gorm and his queen, Thyra, are remembered not just for uniting lands, but also for setting a tone, rulership tied to both martial strength and sacred legacy. Gorm's son, Harald Bluetooth, would carve runes into stone at Jelling, stones that still stand today, weathered but legible, proclaiming Denmark's Christianization and its claim as a kingdom. You stand before the Jelling stones in your imagination, fingers brushing the rough granite. Runes snake across the surface, carved by hands long vanished. On one side, a beast curls in intricate patterns. On another, Harald declares himself the king who united Danes and Norwegians and brought Christ to his people. The stones are sometimes called Denmark's birth certificate, and unlike the fragile scrolls of other monarchies, these are literally rock solid. Here's a quirky tidbit. Harald Bluetooth lent his name to the wireless technology in your phone. Why? Because he united tribes just as Bluetooth unites devices. So the next time your earbuds connect seamlessly, thank a Viking king from 1,000 years ago. Denmark's monarchy survives not by accident, but by reinvention. Viking kings raided across Europe, their longships slicing through rivers and coasts. They looted monasteries, traded furs, and frightened every villager within reach. But eventually Denmark's rulers realised that permanence required more than plunder. Harald's conversion to Christianity in the 10th century wasn't just spiritual, it was strategic. Christianity brought legitimacy, alliances, and a unifying mythos. The monarchy shed its pagan raider image and dressed itself in the robes of European royalty. Historians still argue whether Harald truly believed in Christ or simply saw it as good politics. Either way, it worked. The Danish crown became part of the Christian order of Europe, and thus harder to erase. As you stroll through centuries, the monarchy expands and contracts. Kings like Knut the Great in the 11th century forged a North Sea empire that stretched across England, Denmark, and Norway. For a shimmering moment, the Danish crown ruled an empire that rivaled any in Europe. Picture Knut standing on the shore, waves lapping at his boots. Legend has it he commanded the tide to halt, not out of arrogance, but to prove to flattering courtiers that even a king's power is limited. Whether the story is true or not, it reflects a monarchy aware of both its grandeur and its fragility. Fast forward a few hundred years, and Denmark's monarchy is less about empires and more about survival. The Kalmar Union of 1397 links Denmark, Norway and Sweden under one crown. For a while, it seems like a Scandinavian super-monarchy is born. But like all unions, it frays. Sweden eventually breaks away, leaving Denmark and Norway tied together until the early 19th century. You can almost hear the creak of union treaties being stretched thin, the arguments of nobles in candlelit halls, the whispered curses of rival kingdoms. The Danish crown doesn't always win, but it always endures. By the 17th century, absolutism takes root. Kings like Frederick III declare themselves above parliaments, styling themselves as near divine. Picture marble halls in Copenhagen, chandeliers blazing, portraits of monarchs posing with orbs and sceptres, radiating the same pomp as Louis XIV in France. Yet beneath the grandeur, Denmark is shrinking. Sweden defeats Denmark in multiple wars, slicing away territories. By the 19th century, Denmark loses Norway, then later Schleswig and Holstein to Prussia. Once a northern empire, Denmark is reduced to a small kingdom clinging to its dignity. And here lies the genius of its monarchy. It adapts. Rather than collapsing in humiliation, Denmark embraces constitutional monarchy in 1849. Kings trade absolutism for parliamentary government. Instead of pretending to be omnipotent, they become symbolic, embodying unity. Think of it as swapping armour for a cardigan. It looks less intimidating but lasts longer. Historians still argue whether this shift was voluntary wisdom or forced necessity. Either way, it preserved the throne. Quirky anecdote. King Christian IX, who reigned from 1863 to 1906, was nicknamed the father-in-law of Europe. His children married into nearly every royal family on the continent: Russia, Britain, Greece, Norway. If you've ever looked at European monarchs and thought, wait, aren't they all cousins? Yes, blame Christian IX's family tree. Family reunions must have been awkward. Emperors and queens all crammed round a dinner table, trying not to start wars over dessert. You walk through Copenhagen now, cobblestones underfoot, and see Amalienborg Palace. 4 Rococo palaces face each other across a square where guards in blue uniforms march, their tall bearskin hats bobbing. The monarchy today is no longer about commanding armies. It's about presence, pageantry, and a sense of rootedness. Queen Margrethe II, who reigned for over half a century before abdicating in 2024, was beloved for her artistry. She painted, illustrated books, even worked on set designs for ballets. Imagine that. A queen who spent evenings sketching in her studio, ink-stained fingers wrapped around a pen. That human touch endeared her to Danes far more than pomp could. At the same time, Denmark's monarchy has faced its share of gossip and debate. Critics question the cost of maintaining palaces and ceremonies in a modern democracy. Others argue the monarchy is an anchor of identity, linking Viking past to modern welfare state. Historians still argue whether monarchies in small nations like Denmark serve any real function, or if they're just charming tourist attractions and crowns. Yet the fact remains, approval ratings for the Danish royal family often soar above those of politicians. Perhaps because monarchs don't cut budgets or raise taxes, they just smile, wave, and christen ships. Take a breath. Imagine the North Sea wind brushing your cheeks cold and salty. Long ships are gone, but you can still feel their ghosts in the harbours. The Danish crown has sailed through storms, wars lost, empires crumbled, borders shrunk, yet it still gleams. Not because it never stumbled, but because it learned to survive as a symbol rather than a sword. And here's a last quirky tidbit to lull you deeper. During World War II, King Christian X became a quiet symbol of resistance. He rode daily on horseback through Copenhagen, unguarded, a calm figure in a city under Nazi occupation. Legends spread, falsely, that he wore a yellow star in solidarity with Jews. The story wasn't true, but the myth mattered. People needed to believe their king embodied courage, and that belief, as always, was enough to keep the crown shining. As you leave Denmark behind, you glance one last time at the gelling stones. The runes, though weathered, still declare the birth of a kingdom. The monarchs of Denmark may no longer wield axes or command tides, but their throne, carved in stone and memory, has endured longer than most nations can dream. You step away, the wind howling softly like an ancient saga sung by skalds, carrying you onward to the next crown. The North Sea wind that carried you out of Denmark hardens into sharper gusts as you drift further west and north. The air grows colder, tinged with pine and salt, and the land around you rises into jagged peaks. You find yourself in Norway, where mountains climb so high they seem to slice the clouds, and fjords cut into the earth like silver knives. Here, a monarchy has survived, sometimes obscured, sometimes exiled, sometimes reborn, yet always tied to the ruggedness of its people and the endurance of its land. Norway's crown may not be the most ancient in Europe, but its story is one of persistence, collapse, and renewal, like a fire that flickers but never truly dies out. The roots of Norwegian kingship trace back to Harald Fairhair in the late 9th century. Legend paints him as the first unifier of Norway, a warrior who brought scattered chieftains and petty kings under one rule. The sagas say he vowed not to cut or comb his hair until he had conquered all of Norway, an early example of a leadership style based on questionable personal grooming choices. Eventually, after victory, he washed his tangled locks, earning the title Fairhair. You can almost picture the scene, the young warrior king dripping wet after his first proper haircut in years, his crown gleaming above his newly combed mane. It's part myth, part history, but in monarchies, those two often braid together seamlessly. You walk through an imagined Viking hall, long wooden beams rising above you, the air heavy with smoke and roasted meat. Skalds sing sagas of kings and heroes, their voices rising over the crackle of fire. Norway's monarchy was born in such halls, where loyalty was sealed with oaths and power measured by who could command ships and swords. Yet even from the beginning, the idea of one Norwegian crown was fragile. Local chieftains rebelled, rival dynasties fought, and the throne often shifted like snow in a storm. Historians still argue whether Harald Fairhair truly unified Norway, or if that's simply a saga embellished by poets centuries later. By the Middle Ages, Norway's monarchy was entangled with its Scandinavian neighbours. The crown often passed between dynasties, tangled in webs of marriage and war. At times Norway was independent, at other times it was joined in unions with Denmark and Sweden. You step into the 14th century and find Norway battered by the Black Death, losing nearly half its population. Farms lie abandoned, churches stand empty, and the monarchy itself weakens under the strain. For centuries afterward, Norway falls under Danish rule, its king more often Danish than Norwegian, its crown shining from Copenhagen rather than Oslo. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even when Norway was essentially governed from Denmark, the old sagas and traditions kept alive a sense of Norwegian kingship. Farmers in mountain valleys told stories of ancient kings as if they were still alive. It's a reminder that sometimes monarchy is less about the palace in power and more about the memory of sovereignty. Fast forward to 1814, a pivotal year. After centuries under Denmark, Norway is handed to Sweden as part of the spoils of the Napoleonic Wars. But Norwegians resist. In a burst of independence, they draft a constitution at Eidsvoll, one of the oldest constitutions still in use today. For a brief summer, they even crown their own king, Christian Frederick. The experiment doesn't last. Sweden asserts control, yet Norway keeps its constitution, ruling itself internally while sharing a monarch with Sweden. The crown is bent but not broken. Step into a 19th century Norwegian village in your mind. Timber houses painted red, fishing boats bobbing in fjords, children running barefoot over rocky soil. Above them, the idea of monarchy hangs uncertain. The king in Stockholm is distant, more symbolic than beloved. But nationalism stirs. By the late 19th century, Norwegians demand full independence. And in 1905, the union with Sweden dissolves peacefully, astonishing in a continent prone to bloody revolutions. Norway votes not just for independence, but to remain a monarchy. They invite Prince Karl of Denmark to become their king. He accepts, taking the name Haakon VII. Think about that. In the early 20th century, Norway deliberately chose monarchy. After centuries of foreign crowns, they wanted continuity, tradition, and a figure to embody their new nation. Haakon VII becomes the symbol of that choice. He is crowned in Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim, the ancient coronation site, surrounded by medieval stone and echoing hymns. For Norwegians, the mountain kingship is reborn. Now picture Norway during World War II. German forces invade in 1940, and the government flees. Haakon VII refuses to capitulate. In one iconic moment, German officials demand he appoint a puppet prime minister. Haakon responds that as king of a constitutional monarchy, he cannot appoint someone without his people's consent, but he adds that if the government wishes to surrender, he will abdicate rather than betray the constitution. His words electrify the resistance. When the Germans bomb the town of Nybergsund in retaliation, Haakon and his ministers hide in the forests, snow crunching under their boots as fighter planes roar overhead. Eventually he escapes to Britain, where he becomes a beacon of Norwegian resistance, broadcasting radio messages back home. This is one of the crown's defining moments, a king standing firm in exile, his silhouette crackling through radio waves like a lighthouse across stormy seas. Norwegians painted the letter H for Haakon on walls and fences, a secret symbol of defiance. A quirky detail. They sometimes disguise the H as the number 7, referencing Haakon VII. The monarchy itself became shorthand for resistance. Historians still argue whether Haakon's steadfastness genuinely inspired mass resistance or whether the mythology grew afterward. But either way, it worked. When he returned after the war, the people greeted him like a hero, their chosen king come home. You walk through Oslo now, past the royal palace at the end of Karl Johans Gate. It's not as grand as Buckingham Palace or Versailles. It feels more approachable, almost modest. That's part of Norway's royal character, dignity mixed with restraint. Modern kings and queens ski, hike, and mingle more easily with ordinary citizens. The monarchy survives not by building walls of divine mystique, but by walking among their people. Quirky tidbit. King Olaf V, who reigned from 1957 to 1991, famously rode public trams in Oslo, paying for his ticket like everyone else. During the oil crisis of the 1970s, when driving was restricted, he was photographed riding a tram to go skiing. That single image, an elderly king with skis under his arm, blending into the crowd, cemented his popularity. Imagine seeing your monarch waiting in line for public transport. It's monarchy rebranded for modernity. Humble, yet still symbolic. Today, King Harold V continues that tradition, often emphasising service, unity, and a down-to-earth presence. You can picture him standing at a lectern, his voice steady, reminding Norwegians that their monarchy is not about divine right but shared values. In 2016, he made headlines for a speech embracing diversity, saying Norwegians are girls who love girls, boys who love boys, and boys and girls who love each other. It was a monarch speaking in modern terms, weaving the crown into contemporary identity, and yet the monarchy still carries the weight of history. Nidaros Cathedral remains the symbolic heart of coronation and blessing. Fjords still echo with sagas of Harald Fairhair and Haakon VII, and whenever Norwegians debate the monarchy's role, those debates echo through mountains that have heard kings come and go for a millennium. Historians still argue whether Norway's monarchy is simply a ceremonial relic or a vital thread of national fabric. But for now, the crown endures, its continuity grounded not in grandeur, but in resilience. You feel the chill of mountain air on your skin. High above, eagles circle, their wings catching the sun. The monarchy here feels less like a golden cage and more like a cairn on a mountaintop. A marker, weathered but steady, guiding travellers who pass. Norway's kingship has been conquered, overshadowed, reborn, and embraced. And as you step back from the royal palace in Oslo, you hear the crunch of snow under boots, the whisper of fjord waters, and the echo of a vow once sworn by a king with tangled hair, to unite a people, no matter how many centuries it takes. The Norwegian mountains fade behind you, their icy peaks softening into gentler forests and rolling lakes. As you drift eastward, the new crown gleams through the pines, Sweden's monarchy resilient, reformed, and still glittering despite centuries of upheaval. Here, the throne is neither the oldest nor the most stable of Europe's monarchies, but it is remarkable for how it has endured through wars, reforms, and radical shifts in power. If Denmark clings to its runestones and Norway to its sagas, Sweden's crown survives by bending, reshaping, and occasionally reinventing itself altogether. You begin far back in the mists of legend, when Sweden's kings were half mythical figures ruling from Uppsala. The sagas speak of the Yngling dynasty, descendants of gods who ruled before written history. In those early centuries, kings were less divine monarchs than ritual leaders, figures expected to ensure good harvests and military success. Fail at either, and the people might sacrifice you to the gods. Imagine being a king whose job performance review involves whether the crops grew, and if they didn't, your subjects might offer you up as fertilizer. Not exactly a long-term HR strategy. The first reliably historical kings emerge in the Middle Ages. By the 12th and 13th centuries, dynasties like the Sverker and Erik lines contested the throne. Sweden was not yet a centralised nation, but a patchwork of regions, Götaland, Svealand and others, where kingship had to be won, not merely inherited. The crown passed by election as much as blood, with nobles and bishops weighing in. You can almost hear the debates in timber halls, voices rising over the crackle of fires, warriors thumping fists on tables, priests muttering prayers, all deciding who would wear the crown next. Historians still argue whether this elective monarchy was truly democratic, or simply a game played by elites. By the 14th century, Sweden found itself drawn into the Kalmar Union, that Scandinavian experiment binding Denmark, Norway and Sweden under one monarch. At first, the union seemed strong, but Swedish nobles soon bristled under Danish dominance. In 1520, Christian II of Denmark staged a grand coronation in Stockholm, only to follow it with the infamous Stockholm bloodbath, where scores of Swedish nobles were executed. Picture the square filled with the smell of torch smoke, cries echoing against stone walls, blood pooling in the cobblestones. That horror severed Sweden from Danish rule for good. Enter Gustav Vasa, the man credited with founding modern Sweden's monarchy. In 1523 he rose as leader of the independence movement and was elected king. Tall, red-haired, with a commanding presence, Gustav reshaped Sweden into a centralised nation. He also introduced the Reformation, breaking from the Catholic Church and seizing church lands to fund his crown. You imagine him striding through Stockholm, churches stripped of golden relics, his treasury swelling with silver chalices and gilded candlesticks. Gustav's reign set the foundation for Sweden as a Protestant kingdom, and for a monarchy strong enough to dominate the Baltic in centuries to come. Here's a quirky tidbit. Gustav Vasa is sometimes called the father of the nation, but his methods weren't exactly gentle. He banned Christmas carols at one point, fearing they encouraged drunken revelry. Imagine trying to outlaw Christmas songs. Good luck stopping Swedes from singing after a few mugs of glögg. Still, his reign created the hereditary Vasa dynasty, a line that anchored Sweden's monarchy for generations. By the 17th century, Sweden had transformed into a great power. Kings like Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, led armies across Europe during the 30 Years' War. Picture musketeers marching through muddy fields, drums beating, banners snapping in the wind. Gustavus introduced innovations in military tactics, earning Sweden respect far beyond its size. His sudden death in battle in 1632 left his 6-year-old daughter, Christina, as queen. And here's where monarchy reveals its quirks again. Queen Christina, eccentric and brilliant, grew up rejecting the conventions of her time. She dressed in men's clothing, collected art and books, and eventually abdicated her throne in 1654, scandalising her court. She converted to Catholicism and moved to Rome, where she became a cultural patron. Historians still argue whether her abdication was driven by personal conviction, exhaustion, or sheer stubbornness. But the monarchy survived, reshaped again. Sweden's golden age dimmed in the 18th century. Wars with Russia, Denmark and Poland drained resources. Charles XII, a warrior king, spent most of his reign fighting abroad until his death in 1718 ended Sweden's dream of empire. You picture him in icy trenches outside Norway, snowflakes crusting his cloak, his youthful ambition frozen into tragedy. After his death, the Age of Liberty dawned, when the monarchy's power shrank and the Riksdag, the parliament, took control. The king remained, but his crown was little more than a hat for ceremonial purposes. Quirky anecdote. During this period, Sweden became one of the first countries in the world to develop a system of press freedom. Imagine monarchs fuming as pamphlets and newspapers mocked them publicly, yet unable to silence the presses. Monarchy adapted by surviving as an institution of continuity, even while real power slipped away. Then comes the 19th century, when Sweden's monarchy reinvents itself again. After losing Finland to Russia in 1809, Sweden is desperate for stability. They invite Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, a French marshal under Napoleon, to become crown prince. He accepts, takes the name Charles XIV John, and founds the Bernadotte dynasty, which still rules Sweden today. Picture it, a French soldier, once an enemy of Sweden, now crowned in Stockholm, his descendants wearing the crown for over 2 centuries. If that's not resilience, what is? You wander into modern Stockholm in your imagination. The royal palace, baroque and massive, overlooks the harbour. Guards in crisp uniforms march before its gates, but inside, the monarchy is less about pomp and more about careful symbolism. Today, King Carl XVI Gustaf reigns, his long tenure marked by cautious adaptation. His daughter, Crown Princess Victoria, is widely respected, preparing to become Sweden's first queen regnant since Christina. The monarchy has no political power, yet it remains one of the most popular institutions in Sweden. Why? Perhaps because it doesn't try to rule. It represents continuity, ceremony, and national identity in a democracy. Here's a modern quirky tidbit. The Swedish royal family became unexpected pop culture icons in the 1970s when Carl XVI Gustaf married Sylvia Sommerlath, a commoner. Their wedding was televised and turned into a national fairy tale. Even today, Swedes gossip about royal romances, scandals and fashion choices with as much enthusiasm as any political debate. The monarchy survives not by hiding from modernity, but by embracing its role as a kind of glamorous soap opera. Yet debates continue. Critics argue monarchy is outdated in a society built on equality. Supporters counter that the cost is minimal compared to the soft power and stability it provides. Historians still argue whether Sweden keeps its monarchy out of affection, habit, or mere convenience. But as you walk through Gamla stan, Stockholm's old town, you see the Swedish crown carved into gates, stamped on coins, woven into flags. It's not just about politics, it's about identity. The air around you carries the smell of fresh cinnamon buns and strong coffee from imagined bakeries nearby. You feel the crispness of the Baltic wind, hear church bells over cobblestones. Sweden's monarchy is not about ancient runestones or wartime defiance, but about resilience through adaptation. Kings and queens have lost empires, abdicated thrones, endured ridicule, and yet the crown still gleams atop the Bernadotte line. As you leave, a final image lingers, a crown displayed in Stockholm's treasury, gold shimmering under glass, jewels winking in dim light. It is fragile, outdated, perhaps even unnecessary. And yet it is still here, as it has been for centuries. Sweden's monarchy endures, not because it is invincible, but because it has mastered the art of survival through change. You drift south now, leaving behind the crisp air of the Baltic. The landscape shifts, pine forests melt into olive groves, and the tang of the sea carries warmer notes of salt and sun. Ahead lies Spain, a land of cathedrals that soar like mountains, palaces shimmering with Moorish tiles, and a monarchy that has lived through collapse, exile, dictatorship, and restoration. If Japan's imperial line is a river flowing steadily, Spain's monarchy is a stormy tide, rising, crashing, retreating, and rolling back again. Yet even after centuries of turbulence, the crown still gleams above Madrid. The Spanish monarchy traces its lineage to the medieval kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, Leon, and Navarre. For centuries, Iberia was a chessboard of Christian and Muslim realms, shifting alliances and borders like sand under the wind. The crown you see today was not born whole, but stitched together by dynastic marriage. Picture the late 15th century. Ferdinand of Aragon weds Isabella of Castile, their union forging the basis of modern Spain. Together they complete the Reconquista in 1492, seizing Granada from the last Muslim rulers. That same year they fund Christopher Columbus's voyage westward, setting in motion Spain's vast colonial empire. You can almost hear the clang of swords in Granada's Alhambra and the creak of ships sailing out of Seville, the monarchy's destiny stretching across oceans. Here's a quirky tidbit. Isabella of Castile was so devout that she once vowed not to change her shift, a kind of undergarment, until Granada was captured. Depending on how long that siege lasted, it may have been more of an olfactory than a spiritual trial. Still, she and Ferdinand became symbols of a monarchy blessed by both religion and conquest, remembered as the Catholic monarchs. Their grandson, Charles I of Spain, better known as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, expanded the crown's reach further. In the 16th century, the Spanish monarchy ruled territories across Europe and the Americas. Imagine a map painted with Spanish red, stretching from Peru to the Philippines, from the Netherlands to Naples. Madrid became the beating heart of an empire where the sun never set. But empire is as heavy as a crown, and with it came rebellions, bankruptcies and wars that drained Spain's strength. By the 17th century, under kings like Philip IV and Charles II, the monarchy began to falter. Charles II, the last of the Habsburg line, became infamous for his severe inbreeding. His jaw so distorted he struggled to chew, his body frail, his reign riddled with weakness. Historians still argue whether Spain's decline was due more to dynastic mismanagement or to the sheer impossibility of holding such a vast empire together. Either way, when Charles II died childless in 1700, the crown passed to a new dynasty, the Bourbons. Picture the Bourbon kings bringing French influence into Spain, Versailles-style palaces, Enlightenment ideals, and attempts at reform. Yet turmoil followed them too. In the early 19th century, Napoleon invaded, placing his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne. For a moment, Spain's monarchy was replaced by a French puppet. But Spaniards resisted fiercely, launching the Peninsular War, a guerrilla struggle that bled French armies dry. When Ferdinand VII returned in 1813, he restored the Bourbon line, but his reign was marked by reactionary absolutism and bitter disputes. The 19th century became a carousel of coups, constitutions and contested successions. Here's another quirky tidbit. Queen Isabella II, who reigned in the mid-19th century, was so unpopular that she was overthrown in 1868 in what was literally called the Glorious Revolution. For a brief moment, Spain experimented with having a foreign king, Amadeo of Savoy, but his reign was short-lived, ending with him throwing up his hands and declaring Spaniards ungovernable before leaving the country. Spain then tried a republic. It lasted only about 2 years before collapsing in chaos. So the monarchy returned again, proof that Spaniards couldn't quite live with their crown, but couldn't live without it either. The 20th century brought even greater turmoil. King Alfonso XIII, ruling in the early decades, saw his monarchy undermined by political instability and the rise of dictatorship under Miguel Primo de Rivera. By 1931, Alfonso fled into exile as the Second Spanish Republic was proclaimed. For a while, it seemed the monarchy was truly dead. But Spain's story is never straightforward. The Republic fell into civil war in the 1930s, a brutal conflict between nationalists and Republicans. Out of the ashes rose General Francisco Franco, who ruled as dictator from 1939 to 1975. Franco abolished democracy, but curiously he did not abolish monarchy altogether. Instead, he left it in suspended animation, declaring that Spain would one day be a kingdom again, though not under Alfonso XIII, who had died in exile. Franco groomed a new monarch of his choosing, Juan Carlos, grandson of Alfonso XIII. And here comes the twist of history. Everyone assumed Juan Carlos would be Franco's puppet, a pliant figurehead to continue authoritarianism. But when Franco died in 1975, Juan Carlos astonished the world. He championed democracy, dismantling Franco's regime, and guided Spain into a constitutional monarchy. Imagine the scene. November 1975, Juan Carlos crowned as king in Madrid. The air still thick with dictatorship, the future uncertain. And then, over the next years, he becomes the anchor of Spain's transition. His most dramatic moment comes in 1981, when armed civil guards storm the parliament in a coup attempt. Juan Carlos appears on national television, dressed in military uniform, calmly condemning the coup and ordering loyalty to the constitution. His intervention helps defuse the crisis. For many Spaniards, this cemented the monarchy's restored legitimacy, not as an absolute throne, but as a guarantor of democracy. Quirky tidbit, Juan Carlos was also a skilled yachtsman and once competed in the Olympics. Imagine the King of Spain casually trimming sails in the Mediterranean, crown replaced by a captain's cap. That human touch helped endear him to the people during his early reign. Yet continuity never comes without cracks. In the 21st century, Juan Carlos's reputation faltered. Corruption scandals, extravagant hunting trips, and whispers of affairs tarnished his image. In 2014, he abdicated in favour of his son, Felipe VI, who now reigns. Felipe is tall, formal and disciplined, working to restore trust in the monarchy. He has emphasised transparency, cut royal stipends, and projected an image of stability amid Spain's political turbulence. But debates rage. Is monarchy in Spain a relic or a safeguard? Historians still argue whether Felipe can sustain the crown's relevance in a country with rising republican sentiment. You walk through Madrid in your mind, the sun blazing off white stone. The royal palace looms grand, with sweeping staircases and chandeliers glittering like galaxies. Tourists file past velvet ropes, gazing at gilded ceilings. Yet outside, protests occasionally flare, banners reading República Ya waving in the plazas. The monarchy endures but uneasily, like a painting constantly restored after each crack appears. And yet the Spanish crown still carries weight in the hearts of many. Royal weddings and ceremonies draw massive audiences. The monarchy represents continuity through centuries of chaos. It is the thread that links Ferdinand and Isabella, Charles V, Philip II, Alfonso XIII, Juan Carlos, and Felipe VI. Different eras, different challenges, but the same golden diadem glinting in the Iberian sun. As you leave Spain, you picture the crown of Spain itself. Heavy, gold, encrusted with jewels but rarely worn. It sits in the royal collection, more symbol than tool. A reminder that monarchy here is no longer about ruling empires, but about embodying a story, one of collapse and rebirth, of exile and return, of restoration again and again. The Spanish crown may wobble, may stumble, may even vanish for years, but somehow it always finds its way back onto a sovereign head. The olive-scented air follows you out of Madrid, warm and bittersweet. You carry with you the sense of a monarchy that has died and resurrected more than once, and perhaps will again. Spain's crown, like its history, is never simple, never smooth, but always alive, glowing faintly with resilience in the Mediterranean night. The Mediterranean warmth of Spain fades, replaced by the humid embrace of Southeast Asia. The air grows thick with the scent of jasmine, frangipani, and the faint spice of street food sizzling somewhere nearby. Cicadas drone like distant bells, and you feel the heavy weight of heat pressing down as you drift toward a throne unlike the European ones you've visited so far. This is Thailand, once Siam, a kingdom where the monarchy has endured not just by adapting, but by weaving itself so tightly into religion and culture that it is both earthly and sacred. Here the Chakri dynasty reigns, not the oldest in the world, but one of the most symbolically powerful in Asia, its aura shimmering like the golden spires of Bangkok's temples against the tropical sky. The dynasty begins in 1782 with King Rama I, who founded the Chakri line and established Bangkok as the capital after the fall of Ayutthaya and the short-lived Thonburi kingdom. Picture the scene. Wooden boats clustered along the Chao Phraya River, temples rising freshly gilded, and a new capital city sprouting out of swamp and jungle. Rama I crowns himself in a ceremony blending Hindu, Buddhist and local traditions, declaring continuity with Siam's past but also a new beginning. From that moment, the Chakri dynasty becomes the backbone of Thailand's identity. Quirky tidbit, each Thai king of the Chakri dynasty takes the official name Rama, followed by a number. It's like a royal sequel franchise that never ends. Rama 1 through Rama 10, spanning more than 2 centuries. Imagine if Britain's monarchs had all just been named George. You'd lose track pretty quickly. Yet in Thailand, this naming convention creates continuity, a rhythm of rule stretching across generations. The early Chakri kings solidified their power by balancing tradition and modernization. Rama IV, known in the West thanks to the romanticised tale of The King and I, was actually a scholar monk before taking the throne. Fluent in English and Latin, he corresponded with Western leaders, introduced scientific reforms, and carefully navigated colonial pressures. Historians still argue whether his reforms were truly progressive or primarily defensive, but either way, he kept Siam independent while neighbouring countries fell under European rule. You walk now through the Grand Palace in Bangkok shimmering in your mind's eye. Golden cheddar sparkle like frozen sunlight, and the Emerald Buddha sits serenely within Wat Phra Kaew, the temple of the royal family. The air is thick with incense and the murmurs of barefoot pilgrims. Thailand's monarchy is not just political, it is spiritual. The king is seen as a Dhammaraja, a ruler guided by Buddhist principles, a protector of the faith. This intertwining of religion and kingship grants the monarchy resilience. To oppose the king is for many to destabilise the moral universe itself, but resilience often comes through storm. In the 19th and 20th centuries, kings like Chulalongkorn, Rama V, transformed Siam into a modern state. He abolished slavery, modernised education, and introduced infrastructure like railways. You picture him in formal European dress for portraits, medals gleaming, yet also wrapped in the aura of Buddhist legitimacy. His reign, stretching from 1868 to 1910, became so revered that statues of him still receive offerings today. People light incense and bow before bronze effigies of Rama V, as if before a saint. Its monarchy fused with memory and myth, yet even the most revered monarchs cannot escape change. In 1932, a group of military officers and intellectuals staged a bloodless coup, transforming Siam into a constitutional monarchy. The king remained, but his power was curtailed. Imagine the palace gates that night, soldiers standing uneasily, the old order slipping away without a sword raised. And yet, unlike other nations where monarchy fell outright, the Chakri throne endured. Why? Because the monarchy bent just enough to survive, embracing its role as symbolic rather than absolute. Here's a quirky anecdote from the mid-20th century. King Ananda Mahidol, Rama VIII, died mysteriously in 1946 from a gunshot wound in the royal palace. He was only 20 years old. The circumstances remain shrouded in controversy. Some say accident, some whisper darker theories. Historians still argue over what truly happened that day. But his younger brother, Bhumibol Adulyadej, Rama IX, ascended the throne, and his reign would become one of the most remarkable in modern monarchical history. King Bhumibol ruled from 1946 until 2016, 70 years, the longest reign in Thai history. He became not just a monarch but a near-sacred figure. You picture him in photographs, sometimes in military uniform, sometimes in a simple open shirt, camera slung around his neck. He presented himself as both king and ordinary man, travelling to remote villages, initiating development projects, and positioning himself as the people's guardian. His face appeared on every banknote, his portraits hung in shops and homes, and his birthday became a national holiday. The mythology around Bhumibol was immense. In times of political crisis, he intervened quietly but decisively. During the student protests of 1973, his support helped end a dictatorship. In 1992, when military leaders opened fire on demonstrators, Bhumibol summoned both the general and the protest leader to kneel before him on television, scolding them like wayward sons. That single televised moment restored order. The monarchy's power was symbolic, yes, but it was potent. Quirky tidbit: Bhumibol was an accomplished jazz saxophonist. He composed hundreds of pieces, some of which were performed internationally. Imagine a king unwinding in the palace by jamming on a saxophone, jazz notes drifting over Bangkok. It's a softer image than armoured monarchs or imperial conquerors, but it worked. It humanised him while elevating his mystique. Yet even the strongest myths face cracks. Toward the end of Bhumibol's reign, critics began questioning the monarchy's role. Strict lèse-majesté laws, making it a crime to insult the king, created a culture of reverence, but also fear. Historians still argue whether these laws preserved stability or stifled healthy debate. By the time Bhumibol passed away in 2016, Thailand was deeply polarised, and the monarchy stood at the centre of both devotion and dissent. His son, King Vajiralongkorn, Rama X, ascended the throne in 2016. Unlike his father, he has struggled with popularity. Stories of lavish lifestyles and controversies swirl around him, and while he remains constitutionally protected, public sentiment is more divided. Yet the crown still endures, buoyed by tradition, religion, and the sheer weight of history. You walk along the Chao Phraya in your mind, the river glimmering in the evening sun, barges carrying golden palanquins for royal processions. Monks in saffron robes chant softly in nearby temples. The monarchy here is less about law and more about aura, a sense that the king is not merely a ruler, but a cosmic axis holding society together. Even as political protests flare, even as whispers of reform grow louder, the Chakri dynasty persists. Historians still argue whether Thailand's monarchy has genuine authority or is a carefully crafted symbol propped up by military power. The truth, perhaps, is both. But as long as golden spires rise above Bangkok, as long as portraits of kings gaze down from coffee shops and street stalls, the monarchy breathes. The night deepens around you. Lanterns glow in temple courtyards, casting reflections on marble floors. You feel the heat easing, replaced by the hush of chanting. The Chakri dynasty, through centuries of coups, reforms and upheavals, still stands. Its resilience lies not in armies or constitutions alone, but in its entanglement with the sacred and the everyday, the divine and the human. And as you step back, the image lingers, a golden crown resting beneath the shadow of a spire, incense smoke curling upward, saxophone notes drifting through the warm Bangkok night. The golden glow of Bangkok's temples recedes, and you drift eastward, crossing low mountains and emerald rice fields. The air grows heavier, damp with the breath of the Mekong River, carrying scents of lotus blossoms, wood smoke and monsoon rain. You arrive in Cambodia, a land where the monarchy is less a steady stream and more a phoenix, consumed by fire, reduced to ash, yet somehow always rising again. Few crowns in the world have faced such extremes of grandeur and near extinction. Cambodia's throne has vanished, returned, vanished again, and against all odds, it still gleams today. Your first steps take you back more than 1,000 years to the Angkorian Empire. Here, kings were not merely rulers, they were gods on earth. The Khmer monarchs of Angkor, beginning with Jayavarman II in the early 9th century, created one of the greatest civilizations of Southeast Asia. Imagine Angkor Wat at dawn, towers rising like lotus buds from a misty jungle, carved reliefs stretching for miles, depicting gods, battles, and endless dances frozen in stone. These temples were not just religious. They were royal propaganda in stone, each block proclaiming the divinity of the king. To rule Cambodia then was to claim the title of Devaraja, God King, linked directly to Shiva or Vishnu. The sheer scale boggles your mind. One king, Jayavarman VII, built more temples and monuments than perhaps any other monarch of his age. His face, serene and smiling, stares out from the Bayon temple in hundreds of giant stone carvings, as if he were watching over his kingdom for eternity. Quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists believe Angkor may have been the largest city in the world in the 12th century, with nearly 1 million residents, while London at the time was barely scratching 50,000. The Khmer crown was not just surviving, it was dazzling. But like all phoenixes, Cambodia's monarchy burned. By the 15th century, Angkor collapsed, drained by wars with Siam, internal strife and ecological pressures. The great temples were swallowed by jungle, their kings forgotten in vines and moss. For centuries afterward, Cambodia's monarchy shrank into survival mode, squeezed between stronger neighbours, Siam to the west, Vietnam to the east. Kings ruled, but often as vassals, their crowns dimmed by foreign shadow. Step into the 19th century. Cambodia is fragile, battered by centuries of decline. To survive, King Norodom places his kingdom under French protection in 1863. The monarchy becomes both diminished and preserved, powerless against colonial officials, yet protected from outright annexation. The royal palace in Phnom Penh rises during this period, its golden roofs reflecting both Cambodian tradition and French influence. The king waves from balconies, but real decisions are made in Paris. Historians still argue whether this arrangement saved Cambodia's monarchy from destruction or shackled it in colonial servitude. Here's a quirky anecdote. King Sisowath, ruling in the early 20th century, visited France in 1906 and was so popular with Parisians that postcards of his image sold like souvenirs. Imagine that, a Cambodian king becoming a fashion craze in Parisian cafes. It's a reminder that monarchies often survive not just at home but by fascinating audiences abroad. The real turning point comes in the mid-20th century with King Norodom Sihanouk. Crowned in 1941, he became the face of Cambodia's independence. By 1953, he negotiated freedom from French rule, transforming himself from colonial figurehead into national hero. Sihanouk was flamboyant, charismatic, and restless. A king who abdicated in 1955 so he could enter politics, then returned to royal status later. Picture him directing films, recording jazz music, and simultaneously navigating Cold War politics between America, China, and the Soviet Union. He was a king, a prime minister, a filmmaker, and a political chameleon. Few monarchs in history wore so many masks. Yet the phoenix must burn again. In 1970, while Sihanouk was abroad, General Lon Nol staged a coup, abolishing the monarchy. Cambodia plunged into chaos. Soon after, the Khmer Rouge seized power, unleashing one of the darkest genocides of the 20th century. Between 1975 and 1979, millions perished. Monarchy, tradition, religion, everything was targeted for destruction. The royal palace was abandoned, royal family members executed or exiled. It seemed the crown of Cambodia had been extinguished forever, but in exile, Sihanouk remained a symbolic force. Supported by China and shifting alliances, he became a figure of resistance even as his country bled. And when the Khmer Rouge collapsed under Vietnamese invasion in 1979, the monarchy lingered as a possibility in the background. By 1993, after years of civil war, Cambodia held elections supervised by the United Nations. In a stunning twist, the monarchy was restored. Sihanouk returned as king, older now, frailer, but still the phoenix rising. Imagine the crowds in Phnom Penh, lining the streets, waving flags, tears in their eyes as the royal procession moved through a city that had seen too much blood. Quirky tidbit. During this restoration, Cambodians treated Sihanouk with near mystical reverence. People kept photographs of him in their homes as protective talismans, believing his presence could ward off misfortune. It was less politics, more spiritual balm after decades of trauma. Sihanouk's reign in the 1990s was largely symbolic, with real power in the hands of politicians like Hun Sen. Yet the crown's symbolic power mattered. It gave Cambodians continuity, a sense of identity rooted deeper than war and dictatorship. Historians still argue whether the restoration was a genuine revival of monarchy, or a convenient facade for political elites. Either way, it gave the phoenix its wings again. Today, Cambodia's throne is held by King Norodom Sihamoni, Sihanouk's son. Unlike his flamboyant father, Sihamoni is quiet, scholarly, and reserved. Before becoming king, he was a ballet dancer and cultural ambassador. You picture him rehearsing in a Parisian studio, movements precise and graceful, never imagining he would one day be crowned. His reign has been modest, even self-effacing, yet the monarchy endures. In a nation still marked by authoritarian politics, the king is a gentle, symbolic presence, a reminder of continuity. You wander through Phnom Penh in your imagination. The royal palace gleams along the river, its roofs tipped with golden naga serpents. Monks in saffron robes pass silently along the walls. Tourists snap photos, but for Cambodians the palace is more than architecture. It is the rebirth of a legacy nearly lost. The monarchy may have no real political power, but it is an emotional anchor. Historians still argue whether Cambodia's monarchy will survive the 21st century. Some see it as fragile, dependent on political winds. Others see it as deeply rooted in culture and Buddhism, impossible to erase. Yet the story of the crown here is not about unbroken rule, but about resilience after devastation. Like Angkor's temples, once abandoned but never forgotten, the monarchy stands again, weathered yet luminous. As you leave Cambodia behind, the image lingers, a phoenix crowned in gold, its wings scorched but spreading once more. The air is warm and damp, filled with the scent of lotus and rain. The monarchy here teaches a different lesson from Japan or Denmark. Survival does not always mean continuity. Sometimes it means rising from ashes, again and again, carrying scars but still alight. The humid plains of Cambodia dissolve into mist as you climb steadily higher, winding roads curling like ribbons through green valleys and mountain passes. The air grows thin, crisp, scented with pine and wildflowers, until you find yourself among the Himalayas. Prayer flags flap in the wind like rainbow whispers, and in the distance snow peaks shimmer with otherworldly light. Here lies Bhutan, the land of the thunder dragon, where kings are called Druk Gyalpo, dragon kings, and where monarchy and democracy entwine in one of the most unusual experiments of the modern world. Bhutan's monarchy is young compared to Japan or Denmark, born in 1907 when Ugyen Wangchuck was crowned the first king. Yet its roots sink into centuries of spiritual rule when Buddhist lamas and regional leaders guided the isolated kingdom. The monarchy here did not emerge from conquest or dynastic unions, but from a people choosing unity. Imagine that. Villagers and monks gathering in Punakha, the great fortress monastery, its white walls rising above the confluence of two rivers, choosing one leader to stabilize their fractured land. The Wangchuck dynasty began not with a coup or marriage treaty, but with consensus. Quirky tidbit. Unlike most coronations staged in cathedrals or palaces, Bhutan's first king was enthroned in a dzong, a fortress that is also a monastery. Thick stone walls, red-painted windows and golden roofs housed both soldiers and monks. It was a reminder that in Bhutan, kingship is inseparable from spirituality. The dragon kings do not rule by divine right alone, but by embodying Buddhist principles of compassion and balance. As you walk through the centuries of their reign, you notice how deliberately modest it is. Bhutan has never sought empire, never waged grand wars of conquest. Instead, its monarchy has focused inward, like a monk meditating. Kings strengthened borders, negotiated carefully with powerful neighbours like India and China, and preserved Bhutan's unique identity. In an age when colonial empires swept across Asia, Bhutan remained fiercely independent, shielded partly by its geography and partly by the caution of its rulers. Historians still argue whether isolation was wisdom or stagnation, but it kept the kingdom intact. Step into the 20th century with King Jigme Dorji Wangchuck, the third monarch, often called the father of modern Bhutan. In the 1950s and 60s he introduced schools, hospitals and a national assembly. He abolished serfdom and began cautiously opening Bhutan to the outside world. Imagine the strangeness. A country where television and the internet did not arrive until the 1990s, modernity delayed but not denied. The monarchy acted as gatekeeper, allowing just enough change to preserve stability. Here's a quirky anecdote. Bhutan measures success not by gross domestic product, but by gross national happiness. It was King Jigme Singye Wangchuck, the fourth monarch, who popularised the idea in the 1970s. Instead of chasing industrial wealth, Bhutan would measure well-being by spiritual, cultural and environmental balance. While economists abroad chuckled at first, the idea has since gained global attention. Imagine kings in other countries presenting annual happiness reports instead of GDP graphs. It sounds whimsical, but in Bhutan it is law. You walk through Thimphu, the capital, in your imagination. It is small compared to other capitals, no towering skyscrapers, no neon billboards. Instead, traditional Bhutanese houses with painted wooden windows line the streets. Above them rises Tashi Chodzong, the fortress housing both government offices and monastic quarters. Here, you see the blending of monarchy, state and religion in stone form. Kings walk among their people, not behind palace walls but in modest public ceremonies, their presence quiet yet deeply respected. But the most astonishing act of Bhutan's monarchy is not holding on to power, it is giving it up. In 2006, King Jigme Singye Wangchuck abdicated in favour of his son Jigme Khesa Namgyel Wangchuck, while still in his prime. He also pushed Bhutan toward democracy, drafting a constitution that limited royal powers and created an elected parliament. Think about that. A monarch voluntarily reducing his own authority, insisting that his people should choose their leaders. Historians still argue whether this was enlightened altruism or savvy preemptive reform, but it remains almost unique in royal history. Quirky tidbit. During the drafting of the constitution, the king reportedly insisted on including a clause that allowed for his own impeachment if he failed in his duties. Imagine telling your people, if you don't like me, you can fire me. That humility, whether symbolic or real, cemented the monarchy's legitimacy in modern Bhutan. Today, King Jigme Khesa, the fifth Dragon King, reigns. Tall, soft-spoken, often photographed in traditional robes with his queen, Jetsun Pema, he is beloved by many. His reign has focused on guiding Bhutan through modernization, while preserving culture and environment. You can picture him walking among villagers after floods, bowing to elders, or addressing young people about education. He embodies continuity, but not by clinging to old power. Instead, by sharing it. The Dragon King's resilience lies in their ability to transform monarchy into partnership. In most nations, monarchy survives by becoming ornamental. In Bhutan, it survives by becoming participatory. The king is not distant, not gilded beyond reach, but present, blending authority with humility. It is monarchy as service, not spectacle. Still, challenges loom. Bhutan is small, squeezed between giants. Its young population pushes for jobs, education, and global connection. Modern pressures, social media, consumerism, climate change, gnaw at traditional values. Historians still argue whether the monarchy can continue to balance tradition with modern demands. Yet for now it endures, wings spread like the thunder dragon on Bhutan's flag, claws clutching jewels of sovereignty. You hear the flapping of prayer flags in your mind, the mountain wind tugging at them until they fray. The air smells of butter lamps in a monastery, rich and smoky. You feel the slow rhythm of a country where kingship is not about pomp but about pacing, measured, mindful, steady. In a world where monarchies often cling desperately to survival, Bhutan's monarchy has endured by gracefully letting go, then soaring higher. And as you leave, one image lingers. A king standing before a mountain, his robes fluttering, his hand raised not in command but in blessing. Behind him, the dragon roars in silence, wings unfurled, a guardian of happiness and continuity in a world racing too fast. The thin Himalayan air recedes, and the horizon stretches west once more. You feel the air thicken with desert heat, warm winds carrying the scent of spices, leather and orange blossoms. The call to prayer drifts faintly over tiled courtyards, and minarets rise like spears into a deep blue sky. You've arrived in Morocco, a land where mountains, desert and sea meet, and where the Alawite dynasty has ruled for nearly 4 centuries. Here, monarchy is not just a matter of lineage, but of faith, charisma, and survival. The Moroccan crown is less a relic of the past and more a living institution, adapting to storms while drawing strength from religion and tradition. The Alawite dynasty traces its origins to the 17th century. In 1631, Moulay Ali Sharif established the line that still reigns today. The dynasty claims direct descent from the Prophet Muhammad through his daughter Fatima and her husband Ali. This Sharifian lineage gave the Alawites a unique legitimacy. They were not merely rulers, but heirs of sacred blood. Imagine how powerful that is in a deeply Islamic society, being able to say, "My authority is not only political but divine, passed through the Prophet's family." It made the throne more than an earthly chair. It made it a pulpit of destiny. Quirky tidbit. In Moroccan tradition, some people still refer to the king as Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the faithful, a title that links him directly to early caliphs. It's both political authority and religious stewardship rolled into one. Early Alawite rulers were warriors as much as monarchs. They fought to unify Morocco, pushing back against Ottoman influence from the east and European encroachment from the coasts. Moulay Ismail, who reigned from 1672 to 1727, stands out as one of the dynasty's most formidable figures. He ruled for 55 years, making him one of the longest reigning monarchs in history. Picture him in his capital at Meccan, commanding thousands of soldiers, building massive walls and palaces determined to rival the grandeur of Versailles. Historians still argue whether his ferocity was genius or cruelty. He was said to have executed disloyal subjects by the thousands, but also secured Morocco's independence in a dangerous era. Here's a quirky anecdote. Moulay Ismail reportedly had hundreds of wives and concubines, and is rumoured to have fathered over 800 children. Genetic studies have even suggested this might be plausible. Imagine needing a spreadsheet just to keep track of your siblings. That's the scale of his dynasty's reach. The Alawite monarchy endured by bending but not breaking under European pressure. In the 19th century, Morocco faced growing encroachment from France and Spain. The crown became both negotiator and symbol of resistance. By 1912, however, Morocco was formally made a French protectorate. The Sultan remained, but real power rested in colonial hands. Yet unlike in other colonies where monarchies were swept aside, Morocco's throne survived intact. The French found it convenient to rule through the Sultan, and the people continued to see him as their religious leader. The dynasty endured even when reduced to a shadow. Step into the mid-20th century, and the monarchy becomes the focal point of national liberation. Sultan Mohammed V, later King Mohammed V, played a crucial role in resisting French control. When he refused to cooperate fully with colonial authorities, they exiled him to Madagascar in 1953. But his absence only deepened popular support. Moroccans held onto his image as a rallying symbol, chanting his name in markets and mosques. When he returned triumphantly in 1955, the people greeted him as both sovereign and saviour. Within 2 years, Morocco achieved independence, with the monarchy at its heart. Quirky tidbit. During exile, Mohammed V's family lived in relative modesty, and stories of their ordinary struggles, such as baking bread or caring for children without servants, made them seem more human. This only amplified the myth of a king who suffered alongside his people. Independence didn't mean calm. Mohammed V died in 1961, succeeded by his son Hassan II, whose reign was long, turbulent and often controversial. Hassan ruled with an iron hand, facing coups, uprisings and political unrest. His era is sometimes called the Years of Lead, marked by repression and imprisonment of dissidents. Yet he also maintained Morocco's stability and played a key role in regional diplomacy. He famously organised the Green March in 1975, sending hundreds of thousands of unarmed Moroccans into the Western Sahara to claim it for the kingdom. It was part spectacle, part strategy, and it worked. The monarchy strengthened its hold over disputed territory. Historians still argue whether Hassan II's tactics were brilliant statecraft or ruthless manipulation, but the result was survival of the crown. Picture Hassan II on television, robes gleaming, his presence both magnetic and intimidating. People might have feared him, but they also saw him as the embodiment of Moroccan continuity. Monarchy here was not ornamental, it was the axis of the state. In 1999, Hassan II's son, Mohammed VI, ascended the throne. He inherited both the grandeur and the controversies of the Alawite dynasty. Mohammed VI quickly rebranded himself as a modernizer, loosening censorship, expanding women's rights, and investing in economic reforms. He also cultivated an image as a king of the poor, often photographed visiting impoverished areas and funding social projects. Quirky tidbit. Mohammed VI is sometimes spotted driving his own car through Rabat or Casablanca, a small gesture that makes him appear approachable in a culture that still reveres distance. But like every monarchy, Morocco's crown faces contradictions. Mohammed VI has been praised for reforms, but criticised for maintaining vast personal wealth and political dominance. His fortune, among the largest of any monarch in the world, sparks debate about inequality in a country where poverty persists. Historians still argue whether Morocco's monarchy is a stabilising anchor or an obstacle to deeper democracy. You wander now through Marrakesh in your mind, its Medina alive with colour. Carpets unfurl in markets, spices pile in pyramids of red, yellow and orange, and snake charmers coax cobras in Jama El Fna Square. Above the chaos, the monarchy's presence hovers quietly, woven into the rhythm of daily life. Coins carry the king's image, and his speeches are broadcast like sermons. In Morocco, the crown is both distant and intimate, an institution that exists in golden palaces and in the pocket change jingling on a shopkeeper's counter. The Alawite dynasty's resilience lies in its ability to be many things at once: warrior and mediator, religious guide and modern politician, autocrat and reformer. It is monarchy not frozen in time but shifting like desert sands, reshaping itself to endure. Few dynasties have faced colonialism, exile, coups, and modernization with such agility. As you leave Morocco in your imagination, the call to prayer drifts once more, mingling with desert wind. The image that stays with you is this: a king standing at the edge of the Sahara at dusk, the sky ablaze of orange and purple, his robes fluttering, the crescent moon rising above him. Behind him, centuries of Alawite rulers whisper through tiled courtyards and fortress walls. Ahead of him, the desert stretches infinite, a reminder that monarchy here survives not by being immovable, but by flowing like the shifting dunes, endlessly reshaped, endlessly present. The call to prayer fades into the desert night, and soon the Moroccan winds give way to hotter, harsher air. You find yourself in the Arabian Peninsula, where dunes rise like golden waves and the horizon blurs into endless sky. The heat presses against your skin, dry and merciless, carrying the smell of sand and faint whiffs of frankincense. Here, a monarchy was not inherited from ancient dynasties, but built in the furnace of the 20th century. Saudi Arabia, the desert kingdom forged by tribes, religion and oil. Its crown is young compared to Japan or Denmark, but its influence stretches across the globe. The story begins with Ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia. In 1902, at just 26 years old, he led a daring raid on Riyadh with only a handful of men, seizing control of the city from a rival clan. Imagine the scene: dawn breaking over the desert, shadows moving silently through narrow alleys, a sudden burst of swords and rifles. With that act, Ibn Saud launched a campaign to unite the Arabian Peninsula under his family's rule. Over the next 3 decades, he expanded relentlessly, forging alliances, crushing enemies, and weaving disparate tribes into one kingdom. By 1932, he proclaimed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with himself as its first king. Quirky tidbit: Ibn Saud was said to be so tall and broad-shouldered that foreign diplomats often remarked he seemed carved out of the desert itself. He was also known for his enormous family. By the time of his death in 1953, he had fathered at least 45 sons and many daughters. That sprawling family tree became the backbone, and sometimes the headache, of Saudi succession. The monarchy here is unusual in its foundation. Unlike the centuries-old crowns of Europe, Saudi legitimacy rests on 2 pillars: tribal loyalty and religious authority. The House of Saud allied with the Wahhabi clerical movement, a strict interpretation of Islam that became the kingdom's ideological core. This pact meant the monarchy ruled not only with political power, but also with religious backing. Historians still argue whether this alliance was born of conviction or pure pragmatism, but it created a monarchy inseparable from faith. You walk through Riyadh in your imagination, wide boulevards lined with gleaming skyscrapers, yet shadows of mud brick forts lingering at the edges. The monarchy presides not from medieval castles, but from modern palaces of marble and glass. Still, the desert lingers. Falconry, camel races and tribal traditions mix with oil wealth and futuristic towers. It's a kingdom of contradictions, where Bedouin heritage and cutting-edge technology collide under the same crown. Oil changed everything. In 1938, vast reserves were discovered in Dhahran, and suddenly the desert kingdom became a global powerhouse. The monarchy, once reliant on tribal taxes and pilgrimage revenues, was flooded with wealth. Imagine the transformation. Bedouin camps giving way to oil rigs, caravans replaced by Cadillacs, ancient oases glowing with neon lights. Saudi kings wielded not only swords but barrels of crude oil, reshaping global politics. King Abdulaziz's sons succeeded him, one after another. Saud, Faisal, Khalid, Fahd, Abdullah, Salman, each carried the title Custodian of the Two Holy Mosques, Guardians of Mecca and Medina, the holiest sites of Islam. This title binds the monarchy not just to Saudi citizens, but to Muslims worldwide. Picture millions of pilgrims circling the Kaaba, their prayers rising like a storm, and above them, the Saudi monarchy presides as protector of the sacred. That religious legitimacy is a shield no other monarchy quite possesses. Here's a quirky anecdote. King Faisal, who ruled in the 1960s and 70s, once introduced television to the kingdom. Some conservative clerics resisted, fearing it immoral. In response, Faisal reportedly turned on the TV during a meeting and showed them a live broadcast of the Kaaba. The image of pilgrims circling Mecca silenced the critics. "How can this be un-Islamic?" he asked, "if it brings the holy mosque into every home?" It was monarchy using modernity to reinforce tradition. Yet Saudi Arabia's monarchy has faced turbulence. King Faisal himself was assassinated in 1975 by a disgruntled nephew. In 1979, militants seized the Grand Mosque in Mecca, challenging the monarchy's legitimacy. The siege shocked the Islamic world, and the Saudi forces, after bloody battles, retook the mosque. The monarchy responded by tightening its alliance with conservative clerics, reinforcing its religious credentials. Historians still argue whether this was survival strategy or surrender to extremism, but it preserved the throne. You picture Saudi Arabia in the 21st century, glass skyscrapers rising in Riyadh, oil pipelines stretching across the desert, princes in flowing robes and Western suits alike. The monarchy is both ancient and modern, tribal and global. It survives by balancing contradictions: religious authority with oil wealth, tradition with modernization. King Salman, reigning today, represents continuity, but real power increasingly rests with his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS. Young, ambitious and controversial, MBS has launched sweeping reforms under Vision 2030, seeking to diversify the economy beyond oil. He has allowed women to drive, opened cinemas, and promoted tourism. At the same time, he has consolidated power ruthlessly, sidelining rival princes and crushing dissent. Historians still argue whether MBS is modernizing Saudi Arabia for its people or for his dynasty's survival. Quirky tidbit. In recent years, Saudi Arabia announced plans for futuristic megaprojects like Neom, a $500 billion city in the desert designed to have flying taxis and robotic servants. It sounds like science fiction, but the monarchy uses such visions to project confidence. Proof that their rule is not just about sand and oil, but about the future. You wander into Mecca in your mind, the Kaaba before you. Millions of pilgrims chant in unison, their voices rising like a tide. Above them, portraits of Saudi kings watch from airport walls and city squares, reminders that this monarchy is tied not only to statehood, but to the faith of 1 billion people. That dual role, king and custodian, makes the Saudi crown uniquely powerful. Yet fragility remains. Oil prices rise and fall. Young Saudis demand change. Regional rivals challenge the kingdom's dominance. The monarchy walks a tightrope, balancing modern reforms with conservative traditions, global ambitions with domestic expectations. Historians still argue whether the House of Saud will endure for centuries or collapse under its contradictions. But for now, the desert crown gleams. You step out into the Arabian night in your imagination. The stars are sharp and countless, scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled on velvet. A falcon cries overhead, wings slicing the air. Below, palaces glow with artificial light, while Bedouin tents dot the sand in ancient rhythm. The monarchy here is young, yes, but it feels as old as the desert itself, rooted in faith, tribe, and survival. And as you leave, the image that stays is this: a king robed in white, standing at the edge of a vast dune at sunrise. Behind him, oil rigs pump steadily, steel giants against the horizon. Before him, pilgrims walk toward Mecca, their chants soft as waves. Between desert and modernity, between sword and skyscraper, the Saudi monarchy endures, its crown a strange blend of sand, oil and prayer. The desert horizon does not end in Saudi Arabia. It stretches onward, pale gold under the sun, broken by jagged cliffs and the occasional palm rising from an oasis. You drift northward, and the winds shift, carrying the scent of cardamom coffee, the dust of ancient ruins, and the whispers of prophets. Here lies Jordan, a relatively young kingdom by the calendar, but one with roots older than almost any other monarchy in the world. Its rulers, the Hashemites, claim direct descent from the Prophet Muhammad, linking their crown not just to history, but to the very origins of Islam. In a region where thrones have fallen and republics have risen from their ashes, the Hashemite dynasty has endured by threading together religion, diplomacy and resilience. The Hashemite story begins not in Amman, but in Mecca. For centuries, the Hashemite family served as sheriffs of Mecca, guardians of Islam's holiest city. Their prestige came not from conquest or wealth, but from lineage, the bloodline of the Prophet through his daughter Fatima and her husband Ali. Imagine walking through the narrow alleys of old Mecca centuries ago. Pilgrims crowding, incense burning, and a Hashemite leader standing at the heart of it all, respected as both political guide and spiritual steward. The title Sharif of Mecca carried immense weight, and for generations it cemented the family's authority. The modern kingdom of Jordan, however, was born out of the upheaval of the early 20th century. The Ottoman Empire, long dominant in the Middle East, collapsed after World War I. During the war, Sharif Hussein of Mecca allied with the British against the Ottomans in the famous Arab Revolt, immortalised in tales of Lawrence of Arabia. Picture banners unfurling across the desert, camel-mounted fighters surging forward, the wind carrying the crack of rifles and the cry of "Freedom for the Arabs!" It was both rebellion and dream, a vision of a united Arab kingdom. But when the war ended, dreams collided with reality. The secret Sykes-Picot Agreement divided the Middle East between Britain and France. The Hashemites, promised vast Arab lands, instead found themselves fragmented. Hussein's son Faisal briefly became king of Syria, before being ousted by the French. Later, he was installed as king of Iraq by the British. Another son, Abdullah, marched north with fighters and eventually settled in Transjordan, a region carved by British mandate. There, in 1921, he became emir, and by 1946 Jordan gained full independence, with Abdullah crowned as king. Quirky tidbit: Abdullah I ruled in the early years with a fondness for simple routines. He often drove himself around Amman in an open car, without the elaborate entourages common to other monarchs. His accessibility earned him affection, though it also left him vulnerable. In 1951 he was assassinated while entering Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, a stark reminder that monarchs in this region walk perpetually on dangerous ground. After Abdullah's death, his grandson Hussein eventually ascended the throne in 1952 at just 17 years old. King Hussein's reign would stretch nearly 5 decades, defining Jordan's monarchy in the modern era. He ruled during turbulent times: wars with Israel, waves of refugees, Cold War pressures, and domestic unrest. Yet through it all, he managed to preserve his throne and his nation's fragile stability. Picture him in 1967, after the Six-Day War, when Jordan lost the West Bank and East Jerusalem to Israel. Hussein, though devastated, remained a steady figure for his people. Later, during the 1970 civil war known as Black September, he faced Palestinian guerrilla groups challenging his rule. The decisions he made were brutal, but from his perspective, necessary to preserve Jordan as a state. Historians still argue whether his survival was a triumph of diplomacy or a tragedy of repression. Quirky anecdote: King Hussein was an avid pilot. He loved flying his own planes and would sometimes personally pilot royal or military aircraft. There are stories of him donning a flight suit, climbing into the cockpit and soaring over Amman, half monarch, half adventurer. Imagine looking up into the sky and realizing the jet above might be piloted by your king. Hussein's ability to build personal relationships was legendary. He forged ties with US presidents, Israeli leaders, and Arab counterparts alike. In 1994, he signed a peace treaty with Israel, making Jordan only the second Arab country, after Egypt, to do so. Some hailed him as a peacemaker, others criticised him for compromise, but it cemented Jordan's monarchy as a key player in regional stability. When Hussein died in 1999, millions mourned, seeing him as not just a ruler but a father figure who had guided them through storms. His son, Abdullah II, became king that year. Educated abroad, fluent in English, a graduate of Sandhurst Military Academy, Abdullah embodied modernity. He has emphasised economic reform, technological development, and cautious political liberalisation. He's also a fan of science fiction, reportedly a big Star Trek enthusiast, and once even had a cameo as an extra in an episode during the 1990s. Imagine that. The King of Jordan quietly sitting in the background of a Federation starship. A quirky but very human detail in a life otherwise weighed by heavy responsibilities. Abdullah II today faces challenges that test the monarchy's resilience. Waves of refugees from Iraq and Syria, economic difficulties, political protests, and the balancing act of maintaining alliances with Western powers while preserving credibility in the Arab world. Yet the Hashemite crown continues to endure, anchored by its sacred lineage and its role as mediator in a turbulent region. You wander through Amman in your mind, white limestone buildings climbing the hills, traffic buzzing through narrow streets, the Roman amphitheatre still looming from antiquity. Above it all, the royal palace watches quietly. Jordan's monarchy doesn't rely on ostentatious displays of grandeur. It projects steadiness, continuity, and a kind of understated dignity. For many Jordanians, the monarchy is less about luxury and more about survival, a unifying symbol in a land constantly buffeted by larger forces. Historians still argue whether the Hashemite dynasty has lasted through skillful leadership, foreign support, or sheer luck. The truth is probably all three. The crown has weathered assassination, coups, wars, and regional hostility, yet still it shines. Unlike monarchies in Egypt, Libya, or Iran, Jordan's has survived, adapting without collapsing. As night falls in your imagination, you step into Petra, the ancient Nabatean city carved from rose-red stone. Torches flicker along the narrow canyon of the Sick, and the treasury looms ahead, its columns glowing in firelight. It is a city older than kingdoms, older than crowns, but it reminds you of Jordan's monarchy, carved into the rock of history, battered by time yet still standing. The image you carry away is of a king, whether Abdullah I, Hussein, or Abdullah II, standing at the crossroads of desert and history, his lineage stretching back to the Prophet, his throne precarious yet enduring. The Hashemite crown, like Petra itself, survives because it adapts, because it is rooted both in earth and in faith. The desert winds of Jordan shift and carry you further south and east, across the Arabian sands until you meet the sea. The air grows heavy with salt, and the horizon is lined not with dunes alone, but with ships, dhows with white sails like wings cutting across turquoise water. You have arrived in Oman, a land where the monarchy is not just tethered to the desert, but also to the ocean. Here the sultans of the Alcide dynasty have ruled since the mid-18th century, steering their kingdom like sailors navigating storms. Oman's monarchy is one of survival, adaptation, and maritime ambition, its crown as much about the sea as the throne. The story begins in 1744, when Ahmad bin Said al-Busaidi became the founder of the Alcide dynasty, after defeating Persian forces that had occupied Muscat. Imagine the harbour of Muscat at dawn, rocky cliffs rising behind whitewashed houses, cannon smoke lingering over stone forts built by Portuguese colonisers, and Ahmad standing tall, claiming leadership through both military skill and political acumen. From that victory sprang a line of sultans that still governs Oman today. Quirky tidbit: Oman's flag and coat of arms feature two crossed swords with a traditional Khanjar dagger at the centre. The Khanjar isn't just ceremonial, it's worn proudly at festivals and weddings, a reminder that Omani identity and its monarchy are entwined with symbols of resilience and honour. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Oman's monarchy grew into a maritime power. Its dhows sailed across the Indian Ocean, linking East Africa, India and the Persian Gulf. Zanzibar, off the coast of Tanzania, became an Omani outpost, and later the very seat of its empire. Imagine sultans ruling from coral palaces in Zanzibar, the air filled with the scent of cloves from spice plantations, traders bargaining in Arabic, Swahili and Hindi. For a time, the Omani crown commanded an empire stretching from the Strait of Hormuz to East Africa. a reminder that monarchy here was not just desert-bound, but ocean-bound. Historians still argue whether Oman's expansion was enlightened trade or sheer exploitation, particularly in the slave trade that tied Zanzibar's wealth to human suffering. What cannot be denied is that the Sultanate's reach was vast. Unlike Saudi Arabia's oil wealth or Morocco's desert dynasties, Oman's monarchy defined itself on the seas, steering ships through storms and forging a reputation as navigators and merchants. By the late 19th century, however, Oman's empire waned. European colonial powers encroached, carving up Africa and dominating trade. The Sultanate's African territories slipped away, and internal divisions weakened the throne. The 20th century brought further challenges: tribal uprisings in the interior, poverty and isolation. By the mid-20th century, Sultan Said bin Taimur ruled a kingdom where modern development was nearly non-existent. No public schools for most children, few hospitals and roads still primitive. Oman seemed destined to crumble. Then came 1970. In a bloodless coup supported quietly by Britain, Sultan Qaboos bin Said ousted his father and took the throne. Picture the young Qaboos addressing his people, calm, steady, promising to bring them from darkness into light. He immediately launched a program of modernization, building schools, hospitals, roads and ports. Electricity reached villages, healthcare expanded, and Oman began to emerge from centuries of seclusion. For nearly 50 years, Qaboos reigned, transforming his kingdom while preserving its traditions. Here's a quirky anecdote. Qaboos was a music lover. He composed symphonies performed by orchestras in Europe. Imagine a sultan in traditional robes, listening intently to violins and brass echoing his own melodies. It was a blend of East and West, old and new, just like his reign. Qaboos also defined Oman's foreign policy with quiet skill. While the Middle East bristled with conflicts, Oman positioned itself as a mediator, a neutral player trusted by many. The monarchy's survival depended not on loud declarations but on subtle diplomacy, much like sailors adjusting sails to shifting winds. Historians still argue whether Oman's moderation was pure pragmatism or a cultural inheritance of its seafaring past. Either way, it kept the crown secure in a region where monarchies often fell. You walk through Muscat in your mind. The whitewashed Royal Opera House gleams beside modern boulevards. Above, the Al Alam Palace unfurls its blue and gold columns, framed by Portuguese forts that still guard the harbour. Unlike the massive palaces of Europe, Oman's royal architecture feels almost modest, its elegance understated. The monarchy here projects not excess, but steadiness, like the calm rhythm of waves against the shore. Yet Oman's monarchy is not immune to fragility. Qaboos had no children, and for decades his succession was uncertain. In 2020, upon his death, the throne passed smoothly to his cousin Haitham bin Tariq. Imagine the solemn ceremony. A letter left by Qaboos opened before council, naming his successor, continuity preserved in quiet dignity. Kingly power here does not depend on pompous coronations, but on consensus and stability, the same values that once bound sailors to their captains at sea. Quirky tidbit: Sultan Haitham, before taking the throne, was Minister of Heritage and Culture. He once oversaw archaeological digs and cultural festivals, more curator than conqueror. His love for heritage shapes his approach as ruler, blending modernization with preservation. Today, Oman faces economic challenges: dwindling oil reserves, youth unemployment, and the need to diversify its economy. The monarchy's future depends on navigating these waters with the same skill as Oman's seafarers of old. Yet the crown remains resilient, partly because it is woven into Omani identity. When people wear the khanjar on their belts or raise sails on traditional dhows, they honour not just their culture but the monarchy that has guided it. Historians still argue whether Oman's monarchy will endure another century, or whether economic pressures will erode its foundation. But for now it endures, balancing modern reforms with ancient dignity. Its resilience lies not in showy grandeur, but in its measured, almost humble rhythm, like tides rising and falling, steady, eternal. As you leave Oman, the sea breeze follows you. The image that lingers is of a dhow at sunset, sails glowing orange, the horizon endless, and at its helm a sultan steering carefully, never rushing, never drifting. The monarchy here is not a storm but a tide, persistent, guiding and always returning. The salty winds of Oman fade and your path turns southward. The land beneath your feet shifts from sand to savanna, then rises, higher and higher, until you are surrounded by rugged mountains and thin, brisk air. You have entered Lesotho, a small kingdom tucked entirely within the borders of South Africa. Here, the monarchy is not ancient like Japan's, nor wealthy like Saudi Arabia's, but it endures in a way that seems almost miraculous. It is a throne in the clouds, a mountain crown balanced precariously between tradition and modern politics. Lesotho's monarchy was born in the 19th century, when the region was a swirl of upheaval. European colonisation was pressing in, Zulu expansion under Shaka was reshaping southern Africa, and small chiefdoms faced the threat of extinction. Into this chaos rose Moshoshu I, the founder of the Basotho nation. His story feels like a legend, though it is rooted in history. Born around 1786, Moshoshu was a skilled warrior and, more importantly, a shrewd diplomat. By uniting scattered clans, he created the Basotho identity and laid the foundations of the modern kingdom of Lesotho. You picture him standing atop Thababosyu, the mountain of the night, a flat-topped plateau that became his fortress and symbol of strength. At night, the plateau looked taller and more formidable, hence its name. From here, Moshoshu repelled invaders again and again, including Zulu warriors and Boer settlers. He did not rely solely on force. His genius was in weaving alliances, negotiating treaties, and welcoming Christian missionaries who brought literacy and diplomacy to his court. Historians still argue whether Moshoshu's acceptance of missionaries was genuine faith or strategic brilliance. Either way, it helped secure international recognition for his people. Quirky tidbit, the missionaries introduced horses on a larger scale, and the Basotho became such skilled riders that Lesotho is still known for its hardy ponies today. Imagine a king on horseback, wrapped in a wool blanket against the mountain chill, his people mastering the highlands on small but strong ponies, symbols of resilience that endure to this day. By the late 19th century, however, the pressures of colonialism grew unbearable. To avoid being swallowed by the Boers, Moshoshu turned to Britain for protection. In 1868, Basutoland became a British protectorate, its monarchy preserved but limited. Moshoshu died 2 years later, but his legacy remained, a kingdom intact, its identity secure even under foreign rule. Unlike many African monarchies that vanished under colonial conquest, Lesotho's crown survived by bending strategically. Fast forward to 1966, Basutoland gains independence as the Kingdom of Lesotho. The monarchy, long overshadowed by colonial rule, is restored as a central symbol of unity. King Moshoshu II, a descendant of the founder, takes the throne. Imagine the celebrations, traditional dances in mountain villages, drums echoing across valleys, the crown once again held by a Basotho king in an independent land. But independence is rarely smooth. Lesotho's monarchy soon found itself entangled in political struggles. Prime ministers and generals wrestled with kings for power, and coups became almost routine. In 1990, Moshoshu II was forced into exile, only to return in 1995. Tragedy struck the next year when he died in a car accident on a mountain road. His son, Letsi III, ascended the throne, and he rules to this day. Quirky anecdote. King Letsi III is one of the few modern monarchs who publicly admits to enjoying a relatively modest lifestyle. He is often spotted attending football matches and mingling casually with citizens. For a king, he is disarmingly approachable, though the constitutional limits of his role ensure that he reigns more as a symbol than a power broker. You walk through Maseru, Lesotho's capital, in your imagination. It is small, bustling with taxis and market stalls, yet in the distance mountains loom like stone guardians. The royal palace stands with quiet dignity, less imposing than European castles but deeply rooted in the culture of its people. For Basotho, the monarchy represents continuity, a living link to Moshoshu I, the father who secured their survival in a hostile age. Historians still argue whether Lesotho's monarchy today serves a vital function, or whether it is a ceremonial relic. The king has little political power, but in moments of crisis he can embody national unity. In 1998, when post-election violence shook the country, King Letsi played a calming role, urging peace even while South African troops intervened. The throne may not rule, but it soothes, and in a mountainous land where survival has always depended on resilience, that symbolic role matters. Quirky tidbit. Lesotho is sometimes called the Kingdom in the Sky because of its high altitude. Its lowest point is higher than the highest points of many countries. The monarchy reflects that geography, perched high, exposed to storms, yet enduring with quiet strength. You imagine standing atop Thaba Bosio at night, stars stretching endlessly above, the wind cold against your face. You feel the presence of Moshoshu I, the great founder, and the echo of his descendants who still wear his mantle. The mountain fortress is both ruin and monument, crumbled walls whispering of battles won and lost, yet the crown remains. The survival of Lesotho's monarchy is not about wealth, global influence or ancient prestige. It is about identity. In a small landlocked country surrounded entirely by South Africa, the Basotho monarchy gives its people a sense of sovereignty beyond geography. It reminds them they are not merely a province of a larger neighbour, but a nation with its own king, its own story, its own sky. Historians still argue whether the monarchy can adapt to modern challenges: poverty, unemployment, political instability. But perhaps that misses the point. The crown of Lesotho is less about governing and more about enduring, standing firm in the mountains, a cairn of memory and continuity. As you leave Lesotho in your imagination, the air is thin and clear, the stars burning like lanterns. The image that lingers is of a king in a wool blanket standing on a pony at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping through the highlands. Behind him, the ghost of Moshoshu watches, proud that his people and his monarchy against all odds are still here. The highlands of Lesotho fade behind you, and the air grows thick with the scent of salt and coconut palms. The horizon stretches into endless blue, waves crashing against coral reefs, and the sound of drums thunders faintly from an unseen shore. You have drifted into the South Pacific, where an island kingdom still thrives, Tonga. Here, the monarchy is not a relic of colonialism or a crown transplanted from abroad, but an unbroken Polynesian dynasty that has endured for more than 1,000 years. The Kingdom of Tonga is unique, a Pacific monarchy that has resisted colonization, adapted to modern times, and still places its king at the centre of national life. Tonga's monarchy traces its roots back to at least the 10th century. Oral traditions speak of the Tui Tonga dynasty, sacred kings who ruled not only Tonga, but also exerted influence across Polynesia, over Samoa, Fiji and beyond. These early rulers were considered semi-divine, descended from the gods Tangaloa and Maui. Imagine standing on a beach at sunrise, waves glowing pink, and a chief lifting his arms as the people bow, believing him a living conduit to the heavens. Kingship in Tonga was never just political. It was spiritual, cosmic, a thread binding earth and sky. Quirky tidbit. In early Tonga, kings were considered so sacred that their heads could not be touched, even accidentally. If someone's shadow crossed over a king's head, it was thought to be an act of disrespect punishable by death. Monarchy here was literally untouchable. By the 15th century, the Tui Tonga line had become more ceremonial, while real power shifted to other titles like Tui Ha'atakalawa and Tui Kanakupalu. Rival dynasties rose and fell, and Tonga was often embroiled in civil wars. Yet the idea of sacred kingship persisted, adapting to new circumstances. Historians still argue whether this fragmentation was evidence of decline or simply the flexibility of a system that allowed power to shift without destroying the monarchy entirely. The 19th century brought dramatic change. Tonga's islands, like much of the Pacific, attracted European missionaries, traders and opportunists. Many Polynesian monarchies collapsed under colonial rule, but Tonga's crown proved resilient. This was largely due to Taufa Ahau, a powerful chief who united the islands and became King George Tupu I in 1845. A convert to Christianity, he fused traditional authority with missionary teachings, presenting himself as both Christian monarch and Polynesian king. He drafted a constitution in 1875, remarkably early for the Pacific, that established Tonga as a constitutional monarchy and outlawed serfdom and forced labour. Imagine the sight: a Polynesian king in European-style military uniform, Bible in one hand, war club in the other, proclaiming laws that blended Western influence with Tongan tradition. Taufa Ahau's genius was his ability to adopt what was useful, while rejecting domination. Tonga never became fully colonised. Instead, it signed treaties of friendship with Britain, retaining internal sovereignty. In 1900, Tonga became a British protected state. but its monarchy endured, unlike those of Hawaii, Tahiti or Fiji. Quirky anecdote: George Tupu I was said to be enormously tall and broad, towering over Europeans who visited. Some accounts describe him as 6'5" or more, with a commanding presence that awed foreign sailors. His physical stature mirrored the stature of his crown, imposing enough to make outsiders think twice before trying to erase it. Through the 20th century, Tonga's monarchy remained the anchor of its society. King George Tupo II and later Queen Salote Tupo III carried the crown through colonial entanglements and modernisation. Queen Salote, who reigned from 1918 to 1965, became especially beloved. She was known for her warmth, humility, and cultural pride. When she attended Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953, she became a sensation in Britain by riding through the rain in an open carriage, smiling and waving the entire way. Londoners were enchanted, and Tonga's monarchy gained international charm. Quirky tidbit: Queen Salote was 6'3", towering over most men of her time. She loved poetry and traditional songs, often composing verses herself. Her reign blended regal dignity with cultural preservation, making her one of the most celebrated monarchs in Pacific history. After her, King Taufa Ahau Tupu IV ruled for more than 4 decades, overseeing Tonga's entry into the United Nations in 1999 and slowly nudging the kingdom toward modernity. But as in many monarchies, tensions simmered. By the early 2000s, Tongans demanded more democracy. In 2006, riots erupted in the capital, Nuku'alofa, leaving much of the city centre burned. Protesters called for the monarchy to relinquish absolute power. This marked a turning point. In 2010, the monarchy agreed to significant reforms, making Tonga a constitutional monarchy where most of the parliament is elected. For the first time, the king ceded real power while retaining his throne. Historians still argue whether this was genuine democratization or a strategy to preserve the monarchy. Either way, it worked. Tonga remained a kingdom, but one aligned more closely with modern governance. Today, King Tupu VI reigns, a figure of continuity in a country balancing tradition with global pressures. He represents a dynasty that has ruled for more than 1,000 years, through war, colonization, reform and riot. The monarchy remains central to Tonga's identity, woven into ceremonies, songs and everyday life. Even in a small island nation of just over 100,000 people, the crown looms large, reminding them they are part of a story that began long before European ships appeared on the horizon. You walk through Nuku'alofa in your imagination. Children run barefoot across grassy fields, rugby balls flying through the air, while church bells echo across the harbour. Above it all, the royal palace gleams white. Its Victorian-style gables a blend of Polynesian and European influences. It is not massive or ostentatious, but it is beloved, a symbol of sovereignty and continuity in the only Polynesian monarchy never fully colonised. Quirky tidbit: Tonga's kings are so revered that their birthdays are public holidays, celebrated with feasts, dances and kava ceremonies. Imagine an entire country gathering to honour their monarch with roasted pigs, traditional songs and bowls of earthy kava passed around like sacred communion. Historians still argue whether Tonga's monarchy can survive in the long term. Some say modernisation will eventually erode its relevance. Others believe its deep cultural roots make it untouchable. For now, it remains firm, not as an ornament of colonial nostalgia, but as an authentic Polynesian institution. As you leave Tonga, the night sky opens above the Pacific, stars blazing brighter than anywhere else on Earth. You hear the beat of drums, the rush of waves, and the murmur of chants rising from a kava circle. The image that lingers is of a crown resting lightly yet firmly on the head of a Polynesian king, surrounded by ocean on all sides, a monarchy that has sailed through centuries without sinking. The blue vastness of the Pacific fades, and your path arcs northwestward, toward a land of rainforests, rivers and bustling cities. The air grows thick and humid, filled with the scent of durian, spices and sudden downpours that leave everything steaming. You've reached Malaysia, where monarchy takes a form unlike any other. Not one crown but 9, passed in rotation like a ceremonial torch among hereditary rulers. Here, kingship is both ancient and modern, a federation of sultanates bound together by a unique system that has endured colonialism, independence, and the challenges of nationhood. To understand Malaysia's monarchy, you must first see its mosaic of states. Before there was a Malaysia, there were Malay sultanates, Malacca, Johor, Kedah, Perak, Selangor and others, each ruled by its own dynasty. Some trace their origins back centuries, claiming descent from legendary warriors or even Alexander the Great. These sultans were not just rulers but also spiritual leaders, guardians of Islam which spread across the Malay world beginning in the 13th century. Imagine coastal courts bustling with traders from China, India and Arabia, incense mixing with the smell of nutmeg and clove, and a sultan presiding in golden robes, the Quran beside him and foreign gifts at his feet. Quirky tidbit. The Sultanate of Kedah claims to be more than 1,000 years old, one of the longest continuously ruling dynasties in the world. While historians debate the exact timeline, the sheer persistence of these royal houses is staggering. When you sip kopi in a Malaysian cafe, you may well be in a land ruled by the same families who guided it centuries ago. Colonialism reshaped these monarchies but never erased them. The Portuguese, Dutch and finally the British carved up the Malay Peninsula, controlling trade and imposing treaties. Yet the sultans remained, their palaces intact, their titles recognised even by foreign powers. The British found it convenient to govern through local rulers, using them as intermediaries. Thus, unlike in many colonies, monarchy here was preserved, though often reduced to ceremonial functions. Historians still argue whether this preservation was cynical manipulation or accidental protection of Malay tradition. In 1957, independence came, and with it, a bold innovation: the creation of a federal constitutional monarchy unlike any other. The Federation of Malaya, later expanded to Malaysia, decided that the 9 hereditary rulers, the sultans of the Malay states, would take turns serving as head of state. Every 5 years, they elect one among themselves to become the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the King of Malaysia. It is monarchy as rotation, a game of musical thrones but with dignity intact. Picture the conference hall where these 9 sultans gather, each wearing traditional regalia, silk songket woven with gold threads, jewelled crises at their waists. They cast votes in secret, and from the ritual emerges the next king. It's not a battle of armies or dynasties, but a carefully balanced system designed to honour all royal lines while uniting the nation. Quirky anecdote. The rotation doesn't always follow strict order. Occasionally a sultan may decline or be skipped due to age or controversy. Once, in the 1980s, Sultan Iskandar of Johor was chosen despite being lower in the usual line, stirring gossip and speculation. The system is flexible, like bamboo bending in the wind, ensuring the monarchy adapts while remaining sacred. Walk now through Kuala Lumpur in your mind. Amid skyscrapers and traffic, the Istana Negara, the national palace, rises on a hill. Its golden domes shimmer in the tropical sun. Here, the King of Malaysia resides during his 5-year term. The palace is both modern and traditional, sweeping halls for state ceremonies, gardens where peacocks wander, and a throne room glittering with crystal chandeliers. Yet beyond the grandeur, the monarchy's role is primarily symbolic, a unifying figure above politics. But symbolism here carries real weight. During moments of crisis, political deadlocks, contested elections, the king steps in as mediator, appointing prime ministers and urging stability. He does not rule, but his presence can calm storms. In 2020, when Malaysia faced political upheaval, the king's role in guiding the transition of power was crucial. Historians still argue whether his interventions were constitutional necessity or quiet assertion of royal influence. Quirky tidbit: Malaysia's kings are protected by some of the world's strictest lèse-majesté laws, similar to Thailand. Criticising the monarch can lead to imprisonment. This aura of sanctity keeps the crown's prestige intact, even in an age of social media snark. The monarchy also thrives on pageantry. Coronations are elaborate affairs, blending Islamic rituals with Malay traditions. The king sits on a gilded throne shaped like a crescent moon, holding a golden kris, as imams recite prayers. Outside, soldiers in bright green uniforms march, and musicians play gongs and drums that echo back centuries. For ordinary Malaysians, these ceremonies are televised national moments, reaffirming identity and continuity. At the same time, each state sultan retains local influence. They are patrons of Islamic councils, guardians of Malay customs and beloved figures in their regions. For many citizens, loyalty to a sultan is personal and local, while the rotating king represents unity across the federation. It is monarchy at multiple levels, layered like the flavours of Malaysian cuisine. Walk further into the countryside in your imagination. Paddy fields in Kedah, royal blue mosques in Selangor, palaces gleaming in Perak. Everywhere, royal flags flutter alongside the national flag. Children in schools recite prayers for their sultans. Weddings and festivals often feature visits from royal families who mingle with ordinary people. This intimacy, royalty not as distant deities but as cultural anchors, helps explain why the monarchy remains deeply respected. Historians still argue whether Malaysia's rotating crown is sustainable in the long run. Detractors say it is archaic, expensive and prone to scandals. Supporters counter that it binds together a diverse nation of Malays, Chinese, Indians and indigenous peoples by providing a symbol above ethnic and political divides. Whatever the verdict, the system has worked for more than 6 decades, outlasting many predictions of collapse. Quirky anecdote: some Malaysian royals are known for their personal quirks. One sultan was famous for his love of motorcycles, roaring through the streets on Harley-Davidsons. Another cultivated prize-winning orchids. These hobbies humanise the monarchy, making it not just ceremonial, but relatable. You step out into the humid Malaysian night in your imagination. Crickets chirp and the air smells of satay grilling over open fires. In the distance, fireworks explode above Kuala Lumpur's skyline, celebrating the king's official birthday, a national holiday. The rotating crown is less about one man than about continuity itself, a rhythm of succession that keeps monarchy alive while spreading its weight among 9 dynasties. The image you carry with you is of a gilded throne under golden domes, occupied for 5 years, then passed on. Like a baton in a relay, the crown moves from hand to hand, ensuring that no one dynasty dominates, but all endure. In a world where monarchies often collapse under their own rigidity, Malaysia survives through flexibility, rotating, adapting and shimmering under the tropical sun. The humid Malaysian night falls away, and you drift back toward Europe. This time the air grows salty again, but not with the vast emptiness of ocean. Instead, it is the perfume of the Riviera. Sea spray mingling with luxury car exhaust, the sweetness of jasmine, and the faint metallic tang of casino coins. You've reached Monaco, the tiny principality wedged between France and the Mediterranean, where the Grimaldi family has ruled, in one form or another, since the late 13th century. Here, monarchy is not sprawling empire or mountain fortress. It is survival in miniature, a glittering jewel clinging to the rocks above the sea. Monaco's story begins in 1297, when François Grimaldi, disguised as a Franciscan monk, seized the fortress of Monaco with a sword hidden beneath his robes. Imagine the scene. The gates creak open to admit what looks like a humble friar, but suddenly steel flashes, and the Grimaldis storm in, taking control of the rocky outcrop. This cunning ruse is still celebrated on Monaco's coat of arms, which shows 2 monks brandishing swords. A reminder that sometimes monarchy isn't just born of bloodlines, it's born of clever trickery. Quirky tidbit: because of this legend, the Grimaldis are sometimes affectionately called the monks with swords. A contradiction, yes, but fitting for a dynasty that has always survived by unconventional means. Over the centuries, Monaco passed through turbulent times, caught between the ambitions of France, Spain and Italy. It might easily have been swallowed whole, but the Grimaldis proved masters of survival. They bent when they had to, signing treaties with larger neighbours, and they built when they could, turning their tiny rock into a fortified jewel. Standing on the ramparts of the Prince's Palace in your imagination, you look out at the Mediterranean stretching endlessly, while behind you, portraits of Grimaldi princes and princesses gaze down with aristocratic cool. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the Grimaldis styling themselves as sovereign princes, but sovereignty was always precarious. The French Revolution swept away their rule in 1793, annexing Monaco as part of revolutionary France. For 2 decades, the Grimaldi crown vanished. But like so many monarchies you've visited, it returned. In 1814, after Napoleon's fall, the Congress of Vienna restored Monaco to the Grimaldi family, under the protection of Sardinia. Once again the phoenix of monarchy rose, this time wearing Mediterranean silk. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Monaco faced poverty. Its territory had shrunk after ceding land to France, leaving little more than rocky hills and shoreline. The monarchy was strapped for cash and in danger of irrelevance. Then came the stroke of genius. In 1863, Prince Charles III opened the Monte Carlo Casino. Suddenly, the tiny principality reinvented itself as Europe's playground. Imagine the glittering chandeliers, roulette wheels spinning, aristocrats in gowns and tuxedos sipping champagne. The Grimaldis had found their golden goose. The monarchy survived not through conquest, but by turning their domain into a destination for glamour, gambling, and escape. Quirky anecdote. When the casino was first proposed, locals were horrified, fearing gambling would corrupt society. So the Grimaldis banned their own citizens from entering. To this day, Monegasques cannot gamble in Monte Carlo's casino. It is reserved for tourists. Monarchy here thrives on outsiders' indulgence, while keeping its own house disciplined. The 20th century brought Monaco into global fame through a story fit for Hollywood. In 1956, Prince Rainier III married American actress Grace Kelly. Their wedding was broadcast worldwide, cementing Monaco's image as a fairy tale kingdom. Grace, with her poise and elegance, became Princess Grace of Monaco, transforming the tiny principality into a beacon of glamour. You picture the wedding procession winding through narrow streets, cameras flashing, the Mediterranean sun glinting off jewels and tiaras. For millions, the monarchy of Monaco wasn't just history, it was fantasy made real. But fantasy often collides with reality. Princess Grace's tragic death in a car accident in 1982 shocked the world and cast a shadow over the principality. Rainier, grieving, nonetheless carried on, steering Monaco through decades of modernisation. He expanded infrastructure, promoted tourism, and maintained Monaco's peculiar independence, sovereign yet intimately tied to France. Quirky tidbit. Rainier III was nicknamed the Builder Prince because he oversaw massive land reclamation projects, expanding Monaco's territory by reclaiming land from the sea. In a country barely larger than Central Park, every acre mattered. It was monarchy literally reshaping the earth to survive. Today, Prince Albert II, son of Rainier and Grace, wears the Grimaldi crown. He presides over a Monaco that is both a tax haven for the wealthy and a global hub of luxury. Yet Albert also pushes environmental causes, championing ocean conservation. Imagine him at international conferences, speaking of melting ice caps while still presiding over the Monaco Grand Prix. A strange but telling balance of glamour and gravity. The monarchy here is not about armies or empires, it is about branding, diplomacy and resilience. The Grimaldis endure because they embody Monaco itself, small, glamorous and strategically indispensable. Historians still argue whether Monaco is a true sovereign state or a French protectorate dressed in finery. But for its people, the monarchy represents continuity, and for the world, it represents allure. Walk now through Monte Carlo in your mind. The harbour is filled with yachts gleaming like floating palaces, their decks crowded with parties. Above, the prince's palace rises on its rock, flags fluttering in the Mediterranean breeze. Inside, the Grimaldi throne room gleams with frescoes and chandeliers, but outside, tourists snap photos, buying into the legend of a dynasty that has outlasted wars, revolutions, and near bankruptcy. Quirky anecdote. Despite their glamorous reputation, the Grimaldis have been plagued by scandals and family drama for centuries. From duels to divorces to financial crises, their family tree reads more like a soap opera. Yet perhaps that is part of their endurance. By being dramatic, human, and headline-worthy, they remain impossible to ignore. Historians still argue whether Monaco's monarchy will last. In a modern world where tiny states face immense pressures, can a crown survive on little more than glamour and casinos? Yet the Grimaldis have proven resourceful for over 700 years. If Francois could storm a fortress disguised as a monk, perhaps his descendants can navigate anything. As you leave Monaco, the night sky is filled with neon and stars alike. The Mediterranean laps softly against the shore, and the faint hum of engines from luxury cars drifts up from the streets. The image that lingers is this: a palace perched on a rock above the sea, lights glowing in its windows, the Grimaldi crown glittering not with ancient divinity, but with sheer, stubborn survival. And so, your journey through the oldest surviving monarchies comes to an end. You have walked through palaces and temples, across deserts and mountains, over oceans and into forests. You have seen crowns forged in blood, shaped by faith, polished by pageantry, and tempered by survival. Some thrones tower like mountains, ancient and unbroken, while others flicker like candles, snuffed out and rekindled again. Yet through it all, the thread of monarchy endures, strange, fragile, powerful, endlessly human. Let the pace slow now. Imagine the noise of battlefields fading, the chants of coronations softening, the roar of crowds turning into whispers. Picture instead a quiet hall at night, its chandeliers dimmed, its throne empty, waiting. Around it, history lingers like dust motes in candlelight, reminding you that monarchies are less about rulers than about memory itself. Feel your own breathing steady, as if in rhythm with centuries passing. Inhale the incense of temples in Kyoto, the sea wind of Denmark, the mountain air of Norway, the jasmine of Bangkok, the cedar smoke of Morocco. Exhale the weight of golden crowns, heavy with jewels but heavier still with responsibility. You realise now that monarchy, whether ancient or modern, sacred or symbolic, is not merely about power. It is about endurance, how humans cling to continuity, even as the world shifts beneath their feet. Monarchs die, dynasties stumble, crowns slip, but the idea of monarchy remains, a story retold with each generation. So rest easy tonight. The crowns are safe for now, their jewels tucked away in vaults, their ceremonies paused until the next dawn. History hums softly, like a lullaby sung across centuries. Let it carry you into dreams, where kings and queens fade into mist and only the quiet remains.